Hey, everybody, welcome back to part 2 of the Matthew Terry trial for the day. I'm covering today's live trial because we are expecting the testimony of his ex-girlfriend, which he assaulted and tried to murder back in 2017. He spent 3 years in prison after a jury found him guilty of a lesser included offense of great bodily injury. So she is going to be testifying sometime this afternoon. We're first going to hear the cross-examination of the DNA expert. We heard the direct testimony right before lunch. Hello, everybody. Kat is here. Kat's Gallery. Diamond Queen, how you doing? And Dawn, welcome back. So the jury is not back in the courtroom. The judge is not back in the courtroom. Jerry, hello. How are you? And if the cat comes back, I will put him on screen. He's gone. I think he's outside. He went back out. It's freezing out there. It was, we had a little bit of a light snow this morning, but right now it's not doing anything. So, hi, Lisa. How you doing? Oh, I'm so glad everybody's here. First, we got to sit through the cross-examination of the DNA expert, which is probably going to be incredibly boring. I'll put my microphone on mute. I'm just sitting here diamond painting because I really would like to get this painting finished, although I have a lot more to go. I have quite a bit more to go here. Oh, my goodness. I'm just looking at it to see. Well, actually, no, it's not too bad. Not too bad. In fact, while the cat is not here, let's rearrange this diamond painting. If he comes back, we'll have to deal with that. Oh, goodness. Okay. Finally, I got the call from unemployment. Everything has been cleared. They have voided out the fraud claim, that the fraudulent activity, and I should be getting a direct deposit of all my back pay from back in September. So, which is good because this morning I had to buy a new car battery, of course, right? Diamond Queen is supposed to be getting snow tomorrow, and she's trying to finish her Starry Night Santa by Daisy. Oh, that's a pretty one. Yeah, that'll be nice. Okay, wait a minute. I'm going too far here. Too far. All right. I don't want to go too far afield here because put the cat bed back. Because when he comes back in, he's going to want to cuddle and get back in his bed. He always looks for it when it's not here. So I need to put release papers on the rest of this diamond painting. Hi, Marty. Marty's back. He's diamond painting too, a large landscape mystery kit. Ooh, that sounds like fun. Landscape, cool. Who's the artist, Marty? I'm curious. All right, so I'm going to get out some release papers, put them on the rest of this painting. I'm using Crashley's release papers because they're pretty, the Alice in Wonderland ones. I didn't get any Christmas ones. I'm watching the courtroom. Nothing's going on yet. I'll put them in. I'll share the screen once I see the judge come in. Papers. Oh gosh, we already have Kim Norlin. I don't know that person. All right, I'm going to bring in if a moderator could deal with that troll. All right, I'm going to add them to the screen. Let me go over there and make a full screen so you guys can see everything. The judge is talking, but he hasn't turned his microphone on yet. I just watched this really interesting case where like Law and Crime had their whole setup ready to record this trial, and the defense counsel doesn't show up. The defendant is sitting there, and she says, the judge says, "Where is your lawyer?" And she says, "Well, he had a stroke over the weekend. And he said he told me he wasn't going to be here, but he didn't tell anybody else." So the judge found him in contempt and told her to go find herself a new lawyer. And so that lawyer's in big trouble. If he really did have a stroke, he's still in big trouble, because you don't just leave your defendant hanging when you have a trial. That's crazy. She's on trial for murder, and he just doesn't show up for the trial. I never heard anything like it, to be honest. Yeah, they're still just talking amongst themselves. It's gorgeous going in my hallway of my apartment building for a decorating contest. Aw, nice. I know. Can you believe no lawyer? Yeah, no lawyer. And she said, he knows how to get a hold of this court and how to conduct, he did it. And I don't know why he's not here. So she had no choice but to hold him in contempt. Crazy thing I ever heard. It was a case out of Georgia. So if that ever goes to trial, I'm sure Law and Crime will cover it. But I'll bet Law and Crime Network was pissed because they had all their cameras set up, ready to go, and no lawyer.
I hope everyone had a nice lunch and a sufficient
I'm going to mute myself.
I do have to ask, as always, was anyone exposed to anything about this case between the time we started the lunch break and the time you've returned? Talk about, listen to, hear, watch, or anything at all related about this case by show of hands. Let the record reflect there are no hands. Again, thank you all very much. We are going to now switch. You may recall before the break that the state had finished their direct examination of this witness. She is still on the stand. We did let her step down and have lunch just like everyone else, but she is still under oath, and we're now going to turn to the defense for cross-examination. Mr. Kane, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Ms. Trout. I wanted to just go over some of the basics I think that you had discussed in your direct examination. The first being, I think you said that your education is a bachelor's degree, correct?
A Bachelor of Science, yes.
Right. Okay. And have you at all pursued a master's or any other further education in that field?
I took some credits on my master's, but I didn't complete it.
Okay. And so right now as it stands, you have a bachelor's degree, and that is in forensic science?
Yes, it is.
All right. Now, would you say that in terms of the natural sciences, that biology is probably one that is more geared towards the life sciences, right?
It can be a scope of many different things.
Okay. And it's the study of living organisms and then the vital processes of those living organisms, right?
Biology can be the study of living organisms.
And obviously DNA, that's an organic type of thing that living organisms possess. Would you say that?
DNA can be a thing that living organisms and is a thing that living organisms possess.
So you also talked about how DNA is broken down, and the DNA is a molecule, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the molecule is, I think we've all seen it, somewhat of a helix shape, maybe two things like a ribbon, two things wrapped around each other.
It can resemble a ribbon, yes.
Now, of all the possible loci on a DNA molecule, you're focused on 21 of those, right?
Yes, I'm testing 21 different areas.
And they're not necessarily areas on the DNA molecule that are right next to each other. They can be placed throughout the DNA molecule. Those just happen to be the genetic markers that you guys are looking at for determining uniqueness. Does that sound fair?
They are spread across the different areas of DNA, and they can be anywhere, and they are in combination what makes people unique.
And those 21 markers that you're looking at, you're not looking at, say, if you and I were to compare our DNA, you're not going to take 21 markers on your DNA and then 21 separate markers on mine. You're going to be looking at the same markers on each. Does that sound fair?
We would be looking at the same markers based on whatever we test.
All right, so let's take a look at what you were talking about in your direct when it comes to the 21 markers and the alleles and those things that sort of make each person unique. Want to take a look at that? All right.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to draw this back a little bit. Okay. All right. So would you agree that this is the DNA profile of Mr. Matthew Terry?
That looks like a piece of paper pulled out of my file, and that would be the DNA profile from Matthew Terry.
All right. So you would agree that this is the DNA profile of Mr. Terry?
I can look and cross-check it within my notes to make sure it's the same one.
All right. I can tell you, if you accept my word for it, that this came out of your file. You see the case number and your initials at the top, analyst ET, that's you,
Yes.
right? You see the case number?
Yes.
You see the date? It
Yes.
says STR summary sheet, global filer, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we can agree that's yours.
Yes.
That's your work product, and those are the alleles that you came up for each one of the markers for Mr. Terry, right?
It appears that way, yes.
Okay. All right, so when we say now to use some of the words that we used in direct, we take a look at D3 right up here, right? Okay. D3, would you say that D3 is the loci, the location on the DNA molecule?
D3 is the loci or
Okay.
location.
Now, right next to D3, it says 1516, right?
Yes.
Okay. So would you agree that 1516 is the DNA type at that loci?
1516 is the DNA type for the DNA profile from Matthew Terry at D3.
Okay. And then we go down, obviously, at some point here, we have the Y, XY. Would you say that's the gender marker?
All three of those are the gender markers.
Okay. And then all the rest of the numbers going all the way down to D2 at the very bottom of the page, the rest of those are the loci that are not related in any way to male or female.
Correct. The rest of the loci are not related to male or female.
Okay, so in looking at the rest of the 21, not the three gender markers, but the rest of the 21, from those 21, you can't really tell whether or not somebody's male or female.
No, it cannot.
Okay. Now, you also use the word possible a lot in your direct testimony. And when you say possible, you're talking about the possible presence of DNA, or an individual is a possible contributor or a possible donor to a DNA mixture. You use the word possible because you're never really arriving at an absolute certainty in any of your calculations. Isn't that right?
The word possible is the language that is used because I'm just doing the comparison based on what I know to be the profile from an individual compared to a profile that I don't know where it came from. I know the general location, but I don't know what the end result should be.
And when we're talking about DNA also, we're referring to human DNA, obviously. And human DNA comes from all kinds of sources on a human body, right?
DNA can be found in many different sources that come from the body.
And it can be found in sweat. Yes?
Skin cells would be found in sweat,
Right.
which is where the DNA would come from.
Yes. And also, if you take a swab of somebody's hand, you just rub it across the surface of the back of their hand. That's possibly going to be a source of DNA, whether or not it's skin cells or whether or not it could be blood, or if depending on whether or not somebody's bitten in that location, it can be saliva, semen, hair follicles. Would you say that all of those are potential sources for DNA?
Hair follicles must have a root, but I would expect if you swab somebody's hand that you would likely get DNA from that person.
Now, the hair root would potentially contain blood, correct?
It's possible a hair root can contain blood, but not always.
And there's also, even if you have the hair strand, there's a potential for something called mitochondrial DNA, right?
Yes, but FDLE does not do mitochondrial testing.
You'd have to send that out, but it is a possible source. If you have a strand of hair, that DNA can be found possibly anywhere on the strand, including in the follicle, correct?
Mitochondrial DNA if it doesn't have a root.
Right. So here you're talking about potentially 6 or 7 sources of DNA just from what can be gathered from the surface of the body or potentially with semen or something like that, right?
Well, the DNA is contained in cells, and so there are all the different cells within body fluids, and they could be various.
And you can't look at a DNA molecule, or you can't do some kind of testing, and from that testing alone or from the appearance of the molecule itself, you cannot tell what the source of that is, correct?
If I didn't do confirmatory tests, I 100% say the source of DNA, no.
Now, there are occasions where you can do that, such as a buccal swab. Now, there's a buccal swab in evidence here, isn't there?
There is a buccal swab.
Now, if you have a buccal swab, obviously that's a witness taking a large Q-tip and rubbing it around inside of somebody's mouth, a very rich source for DNA, and collecting that and putting it in an airtight container and sending it off to you guys. You're pretty sure at that point you're dealing with a known source of DNA, correct?
A buccal swab is a known source of DNA.
Yes. So in that circumstance, you're not really concerned with source. You're not really concerned with whether or not it's blood, whether or not it's hair, semen. It's just DNA that you know comes from a known source. And a buccal swab means that it comes from inside somebody's mouth. Is that fair to say?
Can you repeat your question? Sorry.
But you know that if it's a buccal swab, you know that it's not any one of the other possible sources. You know that buccal swab came from inside somebody's mouth, and that's the source of the DNA, correct?
A known standard would be a known DNA profile.
All right. In that circumstance, when you're dealing with a buccal swab, there really shouldn't be any problem getting a complete profile. Would you agree with that?
Sometimes there are issues obtaining a complete profile, but usually we get a complete profile the first time.
Now, the buccal swabs themselves are not the only source for DNA that you may have. Sometimes, would you agree that police may send to you a swab from a scene? And we've seen that in this case. That's also the source sometimes for DNA for you, correct?
A swab from a scene would be a question sample.
Yes. And often, also, sometimes you're sent the actual items themselves. Like you could be sent clothing, or you could be sent a weapon of some kind, and your job is to do the actual swab yourself and do the extraction yourself from that collected item, right?
Sometimes we're sent the actual items and not just swabs, yes.
Were you given any actual items in this case, or were you only provided swabs?
The leaves that I was provided did come as just leaves and not swabs, but everything else, the fingernail clippings came as actual fingernail clippings. The bloodstain card was not a swab. It's a actual card with drops of blood on it. Let me just check the first report just to be sure. And then the rest of the items were swabs.
So the items that were not swabs that were sent to you would be the fingernails, the leaves, and the stain card.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, do you always test for the presence of blood in circumstances where are are you given any facts of the case? Like if you're given the facts of the case, or do you only test for the presence of blood when you're asked to do so, or do you sometimes do that on your own initiative?
Not all the times do I test for the possible presence of blood. Some of those instances would be to ensure that I have enough sample to take forward to DNA analysis, or if the stain is small, I want to make sure that I have enough sample for my DNA analysis. So I take it right to DNA without testing it for blood.
In this case, you were in some ways concerned with the presence of mixtures, right? In other words, with your stain cards or with your buccal swab, under those circumstances, you know that you're only dealing with one known contributor, right? If you get a buccal swab or you get a stain card from the medical leaves, fence, fingernail clippings, you know going in that you're dealing with the possibility of there being more than one contributor.
I don't know any information as to what happened, and I don't know what to expect. So I have no idea what it should be or what I'm going to get when I test anything that's a question sample.
My question is, you're accepting the possibility.
There's always a possibility, but I don't know what it should be, so I'm not saying I expect it is not a fair statement.
And with these fingernails, let's just take that item for a second. Fingernails themselves. When you got that sample, or you got that evidence, did you at all test for the possible presence of blood on the fingernails?
I did not test for the possible presence of blood on the fingernails to conserve sample.
Did you have any information in the case that, like, obviously you tested other materials for the presence of blood, right? So why don't you walk us through really quickly all those items that you tested for the presence of blood?
I tested my item 7, swabs from the front porch, from 6211 front porch. Item 8, swabs from east side of 6209. Item 9, swabs from front west fence of 6209. Swabs from K Baker's neck, which were item 10. I also tested the swabs from the right hands of Matthew Terry, which was item 1, sorry. Item 2, swabs from red stain in backyard of 6209. Item 3, swabs from red stain on
And when you tested, or you tested a swab from the back of K Baker's neck, was that presumptively positive or negative?
the item 10, swabs from K Baker's neck. Item 10 gave the chemical indications for the presence of blood.
Now, at that point, when you realized that there was presumptively blood on the back of K Baker's neck, did you at all consider going back to the fingernails and testing them for the possible presence of blood?
I don't know what order I worked the items in, so I don't know which one I had done first, but it really wouldn't have mattered because fingernails are, when I deal with fingernails, they're always so small anyway. So in order to conserve the sample, I take swabbings from the fingernails and take them to DNA analysis.
Well, how many fingernails did you get?
I can take a look if you just give me 1 second. So item 11, which was the right hand fingernails from K Baker, came to me that had 4 fingernail clippings and a nail clipper. And item 12, which were the left hand fingernail clippings, 5 pieces of fingernails in them.
So with the 5 fingernails that you received, and you have before presumptively tested fingernails for blood, I mean, you don't always say, well, these are too small, I'm not going to test them. You could, regardless of their size, swab 2 or 3 of them for the presence of blood, could you not?
I mean, we're dealing with pieces of fingernails, so I don't have the entire fingernail. Depending on the case, I couldn't say whether or not I've always tested them for blood or always have not tested them for blood. But in this case, I made the decision to not test them for the possible presence of blood and just collect a sample and take it direct to DNA analysis.
Did you presumptively test the right hand for blood?
I did not. The right hand fingernail clippings, I did not test for blood, no.
Well, you're provided a swab of the backhand of Mr. Terry, correct? Or of the hand of Mr. Terry, you were given a swab of his hand? Yes?
I was, yes.
Were you at all provided a swab of Miss Baker's hand to see whether or not it had the presence of blood on it?
I was not provided a swab of Miss Baker's hand.
So you had no idea, based on your findings, whether or not Miss Baker's hands had blood on them?
I have no idea whether her hands had blood on them, but I have just the results that I obtained from the fingernails, the DNA results.
Now, a mixture, as we've heard about it, you can have a single source DNA sample, right? A single source where it's just one contributor. Yes?
A single source is just one contributor.
And you can have a mixture, which is essentially unlimited. You could have anywhere from 2 contributors all the way up to who knows how many, correct?
A mixture is more than one person's DNA.
Now, if we're talking about the left-hand fingernails, I think that would be item 12. Is that correct?
The left hand fingernails was item 12.
Okay. When we talk about a DNA type, another way to say that is the genotype, correct? Does that sound fair?
Both of the DNA types at an area together make a genotype.
Okay. Now we're talking about the fingernails that that's your item 12, correct?
Yes, it is.
I'm going to put something up here. When you have to go through an extraction process and you have to go through an isolation process with your taking one person's DNA and saying that that's going to be a contributor and then trying to identify the second contributor. So first you have to identify that you have a mixture, right? And then you have to break that down into, sometimes you have a major contributor and a minor contributor. Does that sound fair?
That's not really what we do anymore. I'm looking at the DNA types in the mixture together as a whole, so I'm not sure what you mean by isolation process.
Well, when you're saying, well, obviously you're picking and choosing, you're saying, okay, this contributor is 93%, this person is 7% in terms of the mixture, right? So you're assigning a degree of contribution to each contributor.
I'm
correct?
not picking and choosing anything.
All right, well, let's look at your notes here real quick. Now, when I say you, let's just say I'm not necessarily saying you personally, but at some point in your process, you are, let me see if I can hone in on this a little bit. Okay, so these are your bench notes from item 12, the left-hand fingernails. Somebody, be it you or maybe STR mix, when we're talking about your statistical calculator, or somebody at FTLE is saying contributor 1 is 93%, correct? Right there?
When I run it through the program that I use to look at mixtures, it assigns what it believes to be the contributor 1's percentage.
Yes, and this is a thing that you're doing. You're running it through a program, and then, I mean, you're not calling that number wrong, are you?
I'm not calling it wrong. I'm not assigning it 93% myself.
All right. So whether it's you or STR mix, right? And if you want to tell the jury what STR mix is, since we might be using that between us on numerous occasions, if you want to explain to them what STR mix is, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. STR mix, like I said, is a computer program that helps me look at DNA mixtures. It also helps me calculate the statistics. It's just like a big calculator. It does everything that I can do by hand, but because it is a computer, it is faster.
Here, would you say that STR mix or you or whoever else is drawing these conclusions is saying that Kay Baker is contributing 93% to the DNA mixture on her left-hand fingernails?
So what it's doing is looking at the mixture as a whole. It is then looking at the interior components. And of course, I have to look at it to make sure that everything in my STR mix run is working properly and there is no indicators that something went wrong. So I tell it that it is a mixture consistent with two people. So when it's looking at how much DNA is present within the sample, it's saying that for contributor 1, these are the weights and the genotypes that it is calling as contributor 1. So it is looking at the genotype and the DNA types that are present within the mixture and saying contributor 1 at D3, which is that first area, is a 1518, and it's saying the weight is 100%. So there's no other options that what that first contributor can be at that particular area. And if you see the whole contributor 1, it's saying that all of those genotypes are 100% weighted, as those are the only genotypes contributor 1 can be.
And that's a degree of confidence, right? 100%. In other words, at D3, STR mix is 100% confident that the genotype is 1518, correct?
It's not a confidence level. It's saying that the weight is 100% as what those genotypes should be.
Okay. Now that's, as you look at the 93% contributor, it's giving 100% right down the line, is it not?
It is, and with this particular sample, I also knew that it was from Kay Baker, so I told the program that this sample was, if this is item 12, is that right?
This is.
I told it that I know what Kay Baker's profile should be because they were present. It is a sample from her hand. So I told it that these are her DNA types, and then it looks at the mixture with that as well.
Okay, and so there is at times information that you are programming into STR Mix, or commands or information that you independently are putting into that program for it to factor into its calculations, or the amount of weight that it's going to assign any particular marker.
There is different things that I tell it, and if her DNA types were not present, I wouldn't have told it that she was expected to be a donor to that profile.
Okay, so now we get into contributor at 7%. And if I heard you correctly on direct, you said that there was a 1 in 700 billion or something like that, that Matthew Terry was a contributor. You know, and using the language that you use, the statistical language versus unknown versus with Kay Baker, things of that nature. Now let's take a look at D3. Very top, D3. I can zoom in on this if you like. Okay. D3 was a 1516 at 91% weight. Do you agree with that?
D3 is a 1516 genotype with 91.7% weight.
Now, QQ means unknown, right? Meaning that with that 7% amount of DNA for that contributor, you were not able to get an exact marker at D3, meaning that you had an incomplete sample or an incomplete amount of DNA to work with. So QQ was just something that is language for STR Mix, or that you use to show we don't know what the DNA is there, correct?
No, the QQ that you see over in the component just means the genotype isn't greater than 99%. So it's not calling a definitive genotype at that area. What you see under weight and the genotype different combinations is what it believes to be the different genotypes that could be present within that mixture, and the weight it is giving those genotypes that are there.
So because it was less than 99%, it comes out with QQ. So everywhere that it's 99% or greater, you'll see either one number or both numbers. Does that sound fair?
If there is a number under component greater than 99%, it means that it was above 99, equal to or greater than 99%.
All right, now here, it also allowed for other various possibilities. 1618, it assigned a weight of 4%, correct?
Yes.
And on down.
1618 assigned a weight of 4.03%.
Okay, so let's go to D16. Now, if you have Mr. Terry's DNA profile at D16, what is Mr. Terry at D16?
1213.
Okay. How much weight is STR Mix assigning to 1213 at D16?
It is assigning a 34.01% weight.
So in other words, what STR mix is saying there is that it is 34% confident or 34% convinced that that marker is 1213.
It's not a confidence. Again, that weight is taken into account when it calculates the statistic, when it's comparing what the DNA type is present versus what the person is that I'm comparing.
And there's a big difference between 34% and 91%, correct?
There is a difference between the two, but again, it's taken into account during the calculation.
Let's go down to CSF, right at the bottom. All right, CSF is, would you agree that CSF is type 1111?
What do you mean?
CSF, the type at CSF, the marker, CSF, the type is 1111.
I mean, 1111 is the top option at 40.07%.
Which is quite different than 99% or 91%. You agree?
40% is different than 99 or 91%.
And that there's also allowing for the possibility of 1112 at 30%, 1212 at 15%, unknown at 11, 6.34. So it's giving various percentages and assigning various weights to other possibilities. That's what this is doing, correct?
It is assigning the weights, and when the calculation is done, it takes into account the weight that it assigns if the particular person is that DNA type or genotype.
And that's quite different than what we saw with Kate Baker at 100% for every single weight and every single marker, correct?
That is different, yes.
Let's go down to D2, which is, I'm going to show you what Mr. Terry is at D2. The second D2, not the top. All right. See, very last one, very last marker, D2 S1338. Mr. Terry is a 1720. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to walk up to the board here. All right, this is D2 S1338, and obviously this is QQ, right? But you agree that Mr. Terry is a 1720 at D2 S1338, yes?
Mr. Terry is a 1720 at D2 S1338.
Do you see either a 17 or a 20 in any of these possible genotypes when totaled together, STR mixes adding up to 100%? Do you see a 17 or 20 anywhere on there?
I do not see a 17 or 20, but it would take into account where that QQ option is.
In all other circumstances that we were looking at, where STR mix or whatever information you're programming into STR mix is considering what those markers are, and each one of those markers, we see the possibility at various weights of Mr. Terry's DNA type at that marker, don't we?
It is, the STR mix program is looking at what is present within the DNA sample from the question sample and coming up with different combinations of what the contributors could be and assigning weights to those.
And I think I heard you on direct when you said that if somebody's DNA is not at a marker, if they have a DNA type that is not found in the mixture or not found in the single source, that is not their DNA that is contributing to it.
We were discussing single source complete profiles, not DNA mixtures.
So if that's not Mr. Terry's DNA at that marker, And if it's not Miss Baker's DNA at that marker, then do you consider the possibility of a third contributor?
The sample obtained from item 12 was consistent with 2 donors. I don't know specifically off the top of my head what D2S1338 looks like. I would have to take a look at it, but those are very possible genotypes that are there, and a QQ option was given, but it had a low weight, but it doesn't mean someone's excluded. I did run the samples through the program, and if it was excluded, it would have overall excluded the comparison of Matthew Terry.
During that analysis that STR Mix goes through and figuring out the 93%, the 7%, does it ever confuse, in that 7%, does it ever confuse any DNA types from the 93% contributor? Does it ever do that?
I'm not sure what you mean by confused, sorry.
Okay. I'm going to walk you through it here. Go back to CSF, right? Let me find it. Going back to CSF, Mr. Terry is an 1112, but so is Miss Baker. They're both 1112s at CSF. And if you look at the statistical probability or the amount of weight given to 1112, the amount of weight given to 1112 is 30%, which means that it's giving more weight. STR Mix is giving more weight to a DNA type that does not belong to either Mr. Terry or Miss Baker. Would you agree with that?
So again, what the program is doing is looking at what the DNA mixture has as DNA types at all of the areas. It's coming up with different genotype combinations for the different people within the mixture based on how many people I tell it is in the mixture, or if there's an expected donor. I don't know off the top of my head what the DNA types were present at CSF, but it is giving a 1111 as a possible DNA type for contributor 2 at that particular area at 40%. It also gives an 1112 a 30% and a 1212 15% weight based on what is present in the DNA mixture. So that is overall what it's giving as the different combinations as to what can be present in that mixture when I compare someone to it.
At D21, at D21 you see 2929. The amount of weight being given to it is about 45%. You see that?
I see 2929 is 44.97, I believe.
And you also see that 2930 is 32.37.
Yes, I do.
Okay. So if Mr. Terry is a 2929 and STR Mix is giving 45% weight to that, and Miss Baker is a 2930 and STR Mix is giving 32% weight to that, you're saying that under these circumstances, because you're programming, and I think that's what you said, you're programming into STR Mix that it's 2 contributors, correct?
I am telling STR Mix there's 2 contributors and an expected donor on this particular sample.
Is there any possibility at all throughout any of this that STR Mix is overlapping the 2 profiles in some manner?
It knows that I gave it an expected donor, and that is contributor 1's DNA types. Contributor 2 is looking at what is present in the possible DNA types that it could be, and assigning weights to those DNA types and or genotypes that are present. or possible combinations.
Suppose you had typed in there the possibility of 3 contributors. Would it have broken down the mixture into percentage that would add up 100%? Would it have done that? Would it have broken these down and done the exact same thing if you had typed in 3 contributors?
Without doing that particular thing, I don't know how it would have reacted.
What you said earlier also is that you want to make sure that the program is doing what it's supposed to be doing and working as it should. Am I characterizing your testimony correctly?
Yes, there are different things that I look at to make sure it's working properly.
With your Exhibit 5, the leaves, and I believe Exhibit 2, the swabs and the red stain in the backyard. If we just take those 2 exhibits for a second, when you're running a statistical analysis through the software program, through STR-Mix, when you're doing that, would you agree that the values, for whatever it is you're dealing with, the values have to meet certain criteria? You agree with that?
When I'm running STR-Mix, I'm looking at specific values to make sure they are what they should be.
And in order for whatever it is you're doing to be of any use to you, then they should be running as they should be, right? All the values, everything about the program, it should be running as it should, right?
The values should meet what I know them to be, and if not, that run's not used.
Right, and so what you're looking for is you're looking for a statistical probability, right?
What do you mean, overall?
Yes.
Or
Ultimately, that's what you want the program to spit out. You want it to give you some sort of statistical probability, because just on itself, some DNA profile doesn't mean anything. Just by itself, if you're looking at a DNA profile, that's of no use to you. It's the statistics that are of use to you. That's what's driving this, right? The exclusion of everyone else except for whoever's profile is on there, right? That's what you're looking at.
not always. Often, I don't have a DNA standard to compare until way later within the case. So I'm not always ultimately looking for a statistical probability, and that's not calculated until I have a known standard to compare.
That's what I'm talking about. You have a known standard. You still ran a known standard through STR-Mix, right? It wasn't a mixture. You've run a known standard through STR-Mix to give you a statistical probability, right?
Are you talking about the single source profiles or the mixture?
Yes, a single source.
The single source profiles do get run through STR-Mix to calculate the statistic.
And that's the easiest one to run, right? There's nothing to separate. That's the easiest kind of standard to run through STR-Mix. You're not going through the 93% and the 7% and the various weights with the genotypes. All you're doing is running that known standard through a program and asking it to do something very simple, right?
I mean, all of it's fairly simple because it's a computer program and I'm typing numbers in and importing files.
And Exhibit 2 was a single source profile, wasn't it?
Exhibit 2 was a single source profile. Item 2.
Right. You found no evidence of a mixture.
Item 2 was a single source profile.
You found nothing foreign, right?
Foreign's a different word that you would use. It is a single source profile.
Okay. So the first run that you made of the DNA profile from the swabs of the red stain in the backyard, the very first run that you had was useless, wasn't it? Didn't work.
A few of the runs didn't work, but I was able to identify it based on those different indicators I'm looking for. And I was able to talk to my technical leader on what to do. And I was able to fix it. And it ended up running, the run that was used ran fine.
I'm talking about the very first time you ran it through, it was not acceptable.
The first time I did not use that run because it failed the overall run.
Not good. Didn't work. And this is the software program that you're continuing to use throughout this entire process. So the first run of the single source profile from the leaves STR mix didn't like it, wasn't working, for whatever reason, didn't happen, right? And then you did a second run of the same single source. Didn't work, did it?
Nope, sometimes that does happen with
Didn't work.
complete profiles.
So then you ran it a third time, the single source. We're not talking about anything complicated. You've already said it's very simple, very simple. But this really complex statistical calculator that you rely on to exclude and include for this trillions of odds, whatever it is, couldn't do it successfully.
It
Right.
did end up doing it successfully once I was able to identify the two that didn't work, talk with my technical leader on what to do further. And if it wasn't going to work a third time, I was going to put it through a manual calculator and calculate the statistic that way. But I did have a successful STR mix run.
And that's what you're claiming, but you really don't know, do you? Because you didn't run it a fourth time to make sure that that was correct. In other words, you never repeated your success with this exhibit. Bad, no, I mean, so this is the pattern here. No good. I don't like what it's giving me. No good. I don't like what it's giving me. Oh, third time, it's giving me exactly what I want. I'm going to stop now. And then, after you stop with exhibit 2,
Objection on, is there a question other than argument?
yes, you went to exhibit 5. What was exhibit 5?
Exhibit 5 was the leaves.
Okay, let's talk about your first run of the leaves. Now, single source, was it not?
It was single source, yes.
Right. What happened when you ran it the first time with the leaves?
The leaves, it ran in Star Mix and it did fail, but I was able to identify the fail and I ran it again. It failed again. I was able to talk to the technical leader on what to do. And again, this does happen on single source samples. And we were able to come up with what to do. But, and then it did run successfully a third time.
So the first time, would you say that it was similar to the problem you were having with the red stain from the backyard?
It was similar. I was able to identify it and I failed the run based on our standard operating procedures. And then I was able to try it again. And if it didn't fail or if it didn't pass again, I talked to the technical leader, which we figured out how to go about what I was going to do next. And I had a passing run on the third time.
Now, didn't you say that if it did it a third time, you were going to run everything manually? Didn't you say that before? Or does that only apply when you're not getting what you want with one of the single sources? So how many times does this machine or this program have to fail to perform a very simple function before you all just decide to run things manually and do it on your own? How many times does that have to happen?
It is 2 times, and then we determined what to do a third time. And if it failed a third time, I was able to perform it manually on this single source profile.
And this is the same program, is it not, that is calculating all these various genotypes and weights and things of that nature? It's the exact same thing, isn't it? STR mix?
It is the same, but all the other runs passed the first time around. I was able to identify the failing runs, and those were not what was used to provide the statistics.
When we talk about the 7% from the fingernails, I'm going to go through and ask you whether or not you agree with the amount of weight that STR mix is assigning to particular markers. All right. If you want to go to your notes, you can tell me whether or not you agree.
I don't think there's a disagree or agree. It is what it is.
I'm talking
And-
about what was provided.
No, I understand, but I know how Star Mix works and I agree with the program. The program does work how it should work. And if there was any indicator it wasn't working, none of those results would be used.
Ms. Troutman, what I'm asking you to do is to tell me whether or not you agree that this is the number that was produced by your program, not whether or not you agree with STR mix's results. I'm asking you whether or not you will agree with my questioning as I walk you through each one of these markers. If that is the amount of weight the STR mix was assigning that profile for that marker or that item, okay? So if we can go to,
The numbers are what they are. There's not really a agree or disagree. The program does work, and I know the program to work.
can you go to D16, please?
Are you talking about item 12?
Yes,
Okay, if you just give me 1 minute, I can find that.
thank you.
Okay.
D16, the type was a 1213, yes?
The top option was 1213.
Mr. Terry's 1213?
I would have to flip back
Hold on,
unless you
please.
have it.
I approach the witness.
You may. You don't have to ask. Just
Thank you, Shay.
Oh, thank you.
That may help.
Yes.
All right. D16, the highest percentage type was 1213.
D16, the highest percentage, the weight was given was to a 1213.
And the 1213 is Mr. Terry at D16.
Mr. Terry at D16 is a 1213.
And the amount of weight that STR mix gave that was 34%, correct?
Yes.
CSF, the highest percentage type was 1112.
The highest percentage type at CSF is an 1111.
I'm sorry. For Mr. Terry at 1112 and type at 1112, the weight was 30%, correct?
At CSF, 1112 is weighted at 30%.
1111 was the 40% that we had talked about earlier, correct?
1111 is weighted at 40%.
Now at D21, S11, where Mr. Terry is a 2929 and the type is a 2929, STR mix was giving that 45%.
D21, 2929 is given a weight of 44%.
At D18, for any sort of match of Mr. Terry, STR mix was giving it a 13%,
The language wouldn't be a match, it'd be an inclusion.
right?
So what was the question you were asking?
D18 was 13% for an inclusion of Mr. Terry.
1619 is
Yes.
a 13% weight at D18.
D22, 1515, the inclusion weight is 18% for Mr. Terry.
At D22, the 1515 is given a 18% weight.
D5, 1112, including Mr. Terry at 1112, was 35%.
D5 at 1112 is 35%.
Now going down to D2, 1923, for a QQ, which is allowing for even the remote possibility that it's Mr. Terry as an inclusion, is 0.38%.
Sorry, which one are you talking about?
D2, S1338.
S1338. Okay.
So they don't even have Mr. Terry on there, but allowing for even the remotest possibility of any contributor other than a 1923 is 0.38. And Mr. Terry's at 1720. You agree with that?
No, 1923 is weighted at 32%. There are many other different weights, but QQ is weighted at 0.38%, which would be accounted for in the calculation.
Right, 0.38, not even 1%, not even 0.5%.
0.38 is the percentage.
Going to T-Pox, 10Q, and Mr. Terry is a 1011, 10Q, 13%.
10Q is a 13.73%.
SE33 is 8.7%,
SE33
8%.
is 8.7%.
Okay, 1 second, please. Thank you, Ms. Troutman.
Yep.
Appreciate it. No further questions.
We ready, Mr. Diaz? Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Troutman, one of the things the defense asked you about pretty early on that you started to answer, and I don't know that it came out perfectly clear. He asked you about, you kept using the word possible, 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 and you started to respond with something about that's the accepted language. Can you explain that?
Saying the words that they are a possible contributor is just the language that's used based on what FDLE is reporting.
Is that language you picked? I mean, did you decide that that's the language that has to be used?
I did not know.
Is that the accepted language in the science?
It is the accepted language within the community.
Whether that's you or another analyst at FDLE or another analyst at some other law enforcement agency somewhere else across the country or the world, that would be the acceptable way to describe the results per the current custom of people in your field?
Yes, it's an accepted language based on the current guidelines.
You were also asked about the fingernails at Lang and about how you didn't do the chemical testing to see if there's blood on the fingernail or whatever, and you kept saying it was to conserve the sample. What does that mean?
It means I wanted to make sure I had enough sample in order to take it to DNA analysis. Like I spoke about earlier, my DNA testing works best if you put in enough DNA. So I wanted to make sure I was able to collect enough DNA, and even though it would remove a small portion, I wanted to, by doing the blood test, I wanted to make sure that I was going to be able to have enough to take forward to DNA analysis.
You were also asked over and over, the defense kept trying to get you to say that weight is the same thing as confidence, how confident star mix is. And you keep saying weight is not confidence. Can you explain that to the jury?
So what we were looking at is the star mix report. It's looking at all the different genotypes that could be present for the different contributors. And so when you're looking at the different contributors, like we were for number 2, it's giving a particular weight to that genotype at that area. So when I'm comparing a known individual, if they happen to be the genotype that has the lowest overall weight, that is going to take into account during the calculation. Same thing if the person who I'm comparing has the highest weight, it is going to take into account during the calculation as well.
All right, and so let's just hypothetically create the first loci of someone, and it turns out to be an 1112. That's the reading that you believe is an 1112, okay? Is STR mix then looking at the possibility that of 1012, meaning you subtracted 1 from 11 to 12, or 1212, meaning you added 1 to 11, or 1011, meaning you subtracted 1 from 12, or 1013, meaning you added 1 to 12. It's looking at all of those possibilities. Is that correct?
So if our DNA profile in the mixture, and using a mixture is the best way to talk about it. If it is a 11-12, it's looking at what is the overall DNA contribution, and could that person be in the genotypes a 11-12, an 11-11, or a 12-12, and giving a particular weight to all of those combinations. And so then when I make the comparison afterwards, it is providing the statistic based on the weights as well.
So when Mr. Kane kept asking you about how you kept looking for results you like, are you telling me that STR mix is actually looking at all the possible variables? It's looking at 11-12, 11-11, 12-12, maybe 10-11, whatever the case may be. It's calculating all of these possibilities?
It is calculating all the different possibilities.
All right. And at the end of the day, who makes the call? Does the computer make the call or do you make the call?
I make the call if the run works like it should or not. And then if it doesn't, I provide, or I get outside guidance. And then all of my work is reviewed to ensure that
Ask another question.
Yes. Ma'am, so you make the decision about whether or not the run did or didn't work. So let's say you go to do the first run and something goes wrong. The instrument backfires or whatever happens. I don't know what could go wrong, but something goes wrong. Do you just take those results and throw them out completely?
No, I don't. Those are all retained within the case file.
So they can be seen.
Yes.
All right. So now you run it a second time, and those, for whatever reason, there's something goes haywire, whatever the case may be. Do you throw those results out?
No, they're retained in the case file.
So you have all those too.
Yes.
All right. Now you run it the third time, and here's my question: does the computer say, "Well, I know what it ran the first time, so I'm going to use that somehow to decide what I tell you the third time"?
No, they're independent of each other.
It's not tracking what was said the first time or the second time to somehow influence what is said the third time.
No, they're independent.
Is one of the sort of fundamental concepts of science is that it's supposed to be repeatable, that you can replicate it, that you can do something and then do it again. That's sort of a fundamental concept of science.
Having reproducibility is one of the concepts that we look for in testing.
So in theory, if you ran it a fourth time or a fifth time, you would expect to have the same results, again, absent some sort of glitch didn't happen.
I wouldn't know because I didn't run them, but I would hope that they would run fine.
How often do you have glitches? Is this something unusual where you had a case where you tried to run a single source and twice it didn't work as expected?
It's happened to me before, aside from this case, so I know it has happened.
I want to ask you, we keep talking about these numbers, 11, 12, whatever the case may be, 10, 12, all these sorts of things. When you look inside a person, there's not like an actual number. Like if you could look at my DNA, you wouldn't see a 10 and a 12 sitting next to each other, would you?
I would not. The 10 and 12 indicate how many times your DNA is repeated at that particular area.
So going back to what you talked about, you're breaking DNA into these like short tandem repeats, STR, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And when you feed the DNA through a machine, it spits out a number, and it might be 10, 11, 12. I don't know whatever number it is. It'll be some number. Is that correct?
They correlate to numbers.
And so when you're looking at the numbers in total, you're looking at all these different locations, and STR mix is contemplating all the variables of possibilities, whether it's a 10-11, an 11-11, 11-12, whatever the case may be. You're doing all of that. Are you taking all of that into consideration before you're even deciding whether or not a person is a contributor?
I'm making an overall conclusion as to what the sample is before I'm even looking at who can be a contributor and who can't.
Are you therefore looking at the totality of what is there and not each individual instance of what's happening?
I'm looking at the profile as a whole before it's compared.
How many other questions? Take your hand.
May this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
And by the defense released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down and may be released as a witness at this time. I'll ask the state to please call your next witness.
State calls Anna Cox.
Anna Cox.
Where's the ex-girlfriend? Is this a mystery? I'm going to be pissed if it's not today, because he promised to finish his case today, and that doesn't look like it's going to happen. We
Ms.
shall
Cox,
see.
Good afternoon and welcome. You'll come forward to be sworn. Wherever you're comfortable, you'll face me and raise your right hand, please. Thank you. You swear or affirm any testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
I do.
Thank you. You'll follow the bailiff down to the ramp that leads up to the chair. Please watch your step. Go ahead, have a seat, make yourself comfortable. That microphone in front of you is fully adjustable.
Thank you.
You may proceed, Mr. Diaz.
Thank you. I was giving the witness a chance there a second to set up. You ready to go?
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Anna Cox.
And Ms. Cox, what do you do for a living?
I own my own private forensic consulting business.
And do you consult in any particular areas?
I specialize in bloodstain pattern analysis, proper chemical enhancement procedures, as well as proper homicide processing procedures.
All right, those are sort of different things. So let's talk about those just very basically. What is bloodstain pattern analysis?
That is a discipline of forensic science where we analyze and interpret bloodstains at a crime scene in an attempt to provide information on the bloodshedding events that have occurred.
Okay, and then you talked about chemical enhancement.
Yes.
What's that?
That is using a variety of chemicals to enhance whether it be something we call latent fingerprint ridge detail, trying to see if we can get comparable characteristics so that enhancement can be compared to a known item, whether that be fingerprints, tire marks, fabric marks. And I specialize particularly in enhancement of blood prints on a variety of surfaces and substrates.
All right, and you talk about blood prints. What do you mean by blood prints? You mean like bloody fingerprints?
Sure, you can have bloody fingerprints. There can be bloody shoe wear. There can be fabric impressions. I've enhanced weapon impressions. And there's a variety of chemicals that you can use because the surface is basically going to dictate to you which chemical that you need to be using. So I am proficient in the chemical application as well as understanding the chemical composition as well as how it reacts with the surface I'm going to be processing.
Well, let's talk about your educational background. Did you go to college?
I did.
And did you take courses in science in college?
I did.
And then having graduated from college, what did you do then? Did you just go into business for yourself and start doing this?
No.
What happened?
I subsequently went and got a certificate in crime scene technology after I received my bachelor's degree. And that certificate in crime scene technology was comprised of basically your core field work courses: photography, fingerprint processing, proper documentation of a scene, crime scene safety. So it kind of gave you your fundamentals to process a scene. While I was a student at that particular college, I met the section manager of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, of which I subsequently became hired as a forensic science specialist there. And then while I was working, I pursued additional academic education.
And I don't know if it's the correct name, but I mean, everybody calls them crime scene investigators. You become a crime scene investigator?
I did. We were called forensic science specialists, which was just a fancy term for
And is
crime
this
scenes.
around 2000 when all this is happening?
Yes, I actually began as a volunteer autopsy technician at the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office. I did that for about 6 months, and then I was subsequently hired in July of 2000 at the Sheriff's Office.
And so now that you're hired at the Sheriff's Office and you're working as a forensic, what is it again?
Forensic science specialist.
Forensic science specialist. I'm gonna call it CSI. You gotta forgive me. Now that you're working as a forensic science specialist, are you working in the field every day, or not every day, but whatever days you're working out, taking photos, collecting fingerprints, collecting items of potential evidence, whatever the case may be?
Yes, that was my specific job responsibilities, was to respond to crime scenes ranging from property crimes all the way to death investigations. And I was tasked with all forms of identifying, documenting, processing, collecting, proper packaging, securing, maintaining chain of custody, report writing, all of that. I was responsible to do that for any scene I responded to.
So I want to talk with you ultimately about blood pattern analysis. How do you start moving into blood pattern analysis?
After I finished my probationary period at the sheriff's office and graduated from the field training, my section manager recognized that I did in fact have a natural science background and some coursework that I had taken academically, and asked me if I would be interested in pursuing bloodstain pattern analysis. This was roughly a year after I had started the sheriff's office, so in 2001. And I indicated an interest in it and was immediately sent to take professional coursework from other bloodstain pattern analysts in the field. I actually fell in love with the discipline, really enjoyed the science background to it, as well as the application of it to scene work. And I've just been continuing from there.
All right, so when we last left off, you're working at the sheriff's office. You've now sort of started to specialize in the blood pattern analysis. At some point, do you ever go and get further degrees or certificates or anything in school?
Yes, I went to University of Florida and I enrolled in their graduate certificate program, which was 4 courses that had been extrapolated from their master's degree program. I took forensic anthropology, forensic DNA, serology, and I took forensic medicine 1 and 2, and successfully completed that graduate program and received my graduate certificate in death investigation. I did not finish or pursue my master's degree at the University of Florida because then the rest of the coursework became very lab-based, and I don't work in a lab, I work the road. So I was more interested in pursuing an academic education that was more geared towards what I do on a daily basis, and subsequently enrolled in another master's degree program that was in fact field-based.
All right, so you talk about you work the road. Do you mean like you work out in the field?
Yes, I worked the road at the sheriff's office. We call it work in the road, which means I actually dispatched out to active crime scenes. And as part of my private business, I am still contacted by local agencies throughout the state of Florida, and I still respond on behalf of those agencies to assist with an investigation.
All right, we're going to get to that, but in my understanding then, you went to the University of Florida, you got your graduate certificate, and basically you said, I don't want to be a guy sitting behind a desk, or I don't want to be a woman sitting behind a desk in a lab. I want to work out in the field.
I wanted to continue in the field, correct.
All right, so you mentioned that there was another university that did have something more akin to what you wanted. Tell us about that.
I enrolled in a graduate master's degree program through National University, which was is based out of San Diego, California. And that master's degree I got actually specializes in investigations. So it was additional coursework in fingerprinting, photography, major case investigations, proper processing. I was also required to complete a thesis, which had to be peer reviewed before I was allowed to present it to the university. And I did my master's thesis on a very specific field of bloodstain analysis, where I analyzed bloodstains on clothing.
All right, and so that's your thesis that you ultimately presented and defended for your master's?
Correct.
Okay, so now what year are we in when you're getting your master's?
If I recall, I received my master's degree in 2016.
And are you still working at the sheriff's office then, or have you left employment to go be in California and take your school?
Well, I did my academic education from National was online, but I at that time was a private consultant. So I went straight from the sheriff's office. In 2013, I left the sheriff's office and immediately opened my own business, and then kept working the road, working in the field, as well as doing case file reviews for agencies.
All right, and so since 2013, when you kind of put up your own shingle and opened your own business, tell me who hires you and what you've been hired for.
I am hired by law enforcement agencies to respond to scenes, or if I'm not called when the scene is still active, I can do a case file review off of the agency's CSI work. I am also contacted by attorneys, both defense as well as state attorneys, and I also am at times contacted by families as well as civil attorneys.
All right, work both criminal and civil, both for state and for defense.
That's correct.
And how many times do you think you've been hired as a private consultant?
Can I refer to my CV?
If it helps you, sure. Don't read from it, but take a look and refresh your memory.
As a private consultant, I have an overall casework total of over 200 cases.
Okay. And some of those, I assume, are for state, some of those, I assume, are for defense.
That's correct.
And are they only here in Hillsborough County, or have you worked all over the state?
I've worked all over the state as well as in Louisiana and Maryland.
And there's also state court for criminal cases, and there's federal court for criminal cases. You ever worked a federal case?
I have.
Do you currently stay up to date in the field? Do you have to like take some sort of classes, or do you read journals or something to keep you up to speed on what's going on in developments in the science?
Yes, I am members of some professional associations, which affords me the opportunity to read their journals. So that's primarily why I'm actually part of the membership, is to have access to the journals. I also teach quite frequently, and I recognize part of my responsibility as being an instructor is to be well-versed on new trends, new scientific information. So I do a lot of my own self-instruction.
And when you say you teach, do you mean like you teach like in a classroom, like at a university, or do you mean like you teach crime scene investigators, like new ones? What do you mean?
I teach bloodstain coursework. I teach chemical enhancement, primarily at this time to local agencies, as well as through professional law enforcement affiliations. For example, the Institute of Police Technology and Management, which is affiliated with the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. So I will teach up and coming crime scene investigators and investigators. I've had attorneys I've taught in courses. I've had some laboratory people who have opted to take some of my courses. So I have the opportunity to teach to a variety of different types of individuals.
Have you ever been asked to serve as a guest speaker or a lecturer or something like that, like at a conference or anything of that sort?
Yes, I actually have spoken for the International Association of Homicide Investigators. I've done bloodstain analysis presentations for them. I have also taught bloodstain analysis for a multi-jurisdictional law enforcement society up in up in Illinois. I also have taught at the Florida division of the International Association of Identification. I did a professional presentation for them. So I also do speak as well for affiliations, yes.
All right, at this time, I return to the witness report here.
Any questions?
Nothing.
Judge, can I approach? Senator,
You don't have to ask.
Thanks, Judge. Ma'am, I'm going to show you States Exhibit 64A and B and States Exhibit 65A through M. Do you recognize these things?
I do.
All right, as to States 64A and B, are those diagrams that you created for the purposes of assisting in your testimony today?
The large one is my diagram, and then this back page is just a enlargement of a portion of that diagram.
And those are things that you created yourself?
Correct.
Your Honor, I'd move into evidence States Exhibit number 64A and B.
Any objection?
No objection.
Okay, 64A and B will be admitted at this time.
And as to 65A through M, are those photos that you took of evidence that's in this case that you used for purposes of analysis that you'll be testifying to shortly?
Yes.
Do those photos fairly and accurately depict the items that you saw and the things that you observed on them?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move into evidence States Exhibit number 65A through M.
Any objection?
No objection.
65A through M admitted at this time.
Ms. Cox, did you also prepare a PowerPoint slide as a demonstrative to help explain the work that you do?
I did.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, at this time, I would publish the demonstrative that Ms. Cox created.
Any objection?
I'd say no.
All right, you may.
All right, let me see if I can get this to work. Oh, good. So is this your PowerPoint?
Yes, it is.
All right, I'm gonna click through the pages and you tell us what we're using here, explain to us what we're reading and what's important.
Okay, so I've abbreviated blood-stain pattern analysis. We just call it BPA. And it is, by definition, the scientific study of the blood stains and patterns resulting from a bloodshedding event. So regardless of the type of incident that causes the bloodshedding event, we can respond and attempt to analyze and interpret the blood stains. So it could be anything from a burglary to a death investigation. And what we are tasked with doing is we identify, document, define, analyze, and then interpret the blood stains and patterns that we visually see at the scene. And there's a lot of considerations that we must make when we are attempting to analyze and then interpret the bloodshedding event. We look at the size, the shape, and the distribution of the blood stains and patterns. We look at the number of the blood stains. And the interesting thing about the size, shape, and distribution of the blood stains is that the way that the blood stain is distributed is very entrenched to the natural sciences. It really reflects some of the core concepts of physics. Then we look at the number of the stains. We look at their location, the surface that they're on. And we also look at the relationship of the stains and patterns to other stains and patterns at the scene, as well as other items of evidence. So it is incredibly beneficial for me that I do have a crime scene background, of which I've responded to a variety of different scenes, because I understand how different surfaces and different situations can affect evidence at a particular scene. Then, of course, we have to be respectful of scene-specific variables. And what I mean by that would be like the history of the scene, the evidence itself. Is it an indoor? Is it an outdoor scene? Are there multiple persons that are shedding blood? Has there been any type of medical intervention? Has there been collection of evidence prior to documentation due to element reasons? So those are all things, all of those must be considered when you're attempting to do an analysis and an interpretation.
All right, I'm gonna click over to the second page. What are we looking at here?
A lot of times people ask me why I'm called out to work a scene or why I'm called to do a case file review. And the primary ones that I'm requested to see if I can do is determine the location of the individual when injuries were inflicted, to determine a possible sequence of events that created the patterns. For example, if there's any alteration to the blood stains or patterns, or if you have blood stains on top of blood stains, to attempt to see if we can sequence how those were distributed. And then if an individual is contaminated with blood and has moved around the scene itself, we can also analyze and interpret to see what those movements may indicate or where in fact those individuals went.
Third slide. What should we take away from this?
The analysis of blood is entrenched in the natural sciences. So we have to be respectful of the fact that we do need to have a background in chemistry and physics and biology. We also use mathematics on certain scenes. And each individual scene is going to dictate which natural science is going to play the most priority on our type of analysis. So for example, one of the primary things that we must be aware of is the actual components of blood. And we also have to understand body's reaction to the infliction of injury. So we have to be at least aware of and understanding of medical examiner results or medical intervention results or medical treatment. We also have to understand that once the blood has left the body and it's exposed to the environment, certain environments can impose drastic changes on blood itself. So we also have to be aware of that to make sure that we are in fact considering all of the blood that needs to be considered, but also not considering things that are not blood. And then physics, we have a fundamental knowledge of the basic laws of physics as it applies to the distribution of blood. And the two primary ones are going to be your traditional gravity and air resistance, which are your naturally occurring phenomenon that can play a role in how blood is distributed. And then, of course, if there's an introduction of an outside force that disrupts your natural physics, those blood stains and patterns are going to look completely different than the stains and patterns that are just affected by your natural laws of physics of gravity and air resistance.
Next slide. Tell us what we're taking away from this.
The identifying blood stains and patterns, we as blood stain analysts, we have several blood stains and patterns that based on their physical appearance and their size, their shape, and their distribution, we have several categories of blood that have already been defined based on those characteristics. And the best way for me to describe blood stain analysis is it's like a forest full of trees, and all of your trees have a tree trunk. And your tree trunk is going to be your very basic generic description of a blood stain. There are times when we are able to actually analyze and interpret a blood stain even more definitively, and we'll start to go up on what I call the branches. So for example, one of our patterns is something called a projection pattern. And that is a blood stain pattern that results from the ejection of blood under hydraulic pressure. And it's typically caused by a breach in the circulatory system, especially something like an artery. We also have your large volume. So your large volume stains are going to be what we consider to be your passive tree trunk, which means that is a blood stain that results from an accumulation of blood on a particular area. So for example, an injury is bleeding. There's not a lot of introduction of force to it. It's just the wound is allowed to bleed and it's not being inhibited or interrupted by anything. That is completely different than a projection pattern because a projection pattern is under hydraulic pressure. So that's they're visually completely different. Another passive tree branch would be a drip stain and a drip trail. And those are basically falling drops of blood that form due to gravity. So example I can give is you're rendering aid, you've cut your finger, you're rendering aid over your bathroom sink. While you're trying to render aid, the blood is just dripping down and coming off of your elbow. That would be a passive drip stain. Drip trails go from one location to another. Sometimes you can tell which way, sometimes you can't. And sometimes we get a phenomenon called satellite spatter. And satellite spatter associated with your drip stains is a smaller blood stain that actually forms because the parent stain impacts the surface. Best example of that is a rainstorm. You watch a rainstorm, you watch a puddle, rain hits the puddle, and you'll see it break into little pieces and bounce outward. That's what we call satellite spatter. We also see that with blood stains. Cast off is going to be a different tree trunk. This is going to be blood released from an object due to its motion. So that motion could be the rapid acceleration or the rapid deceleration of an item. Typically, you'll hear people refer to it as something being flung. So an example of that would be if I had blood on the end of my fingers and I flung my hand like that, that would cause cast off, which is once again a completely different action than blood just dripping off my hand. Transfer is exactly what it sounds like. A surface that's contaminated with wet blood comes into contact with another surface and distributes a pattern. Sometimes we can tell what that is. Sometimes it could be a handprint, it could be fingerprints, it could be a shoe print. Sometimes we can't tell. There's no discernible characteristics. A swipe is almost exactly like a transfer, but it shows movement. So rather than just my hand coming straight up and down, it shows relative movement. And then a flow pattern is where blood, the movement of a volume of blood due to the gravity or movement of a target. A lot of times you'll see flow patterns when you have a large accumulation of blood and the blood just streams down following the topography of whatever item it is on.
What are we looking at here in the next slide?
One of the things that we can use to interpret possible movement or the directionality of a person who's contaminated with blood or the direction an item was moving when blood was dispersed, we call that directionality. So for example, the stains over here on the left, we call them tadpole stains. Some people call them exclamation points. The gist of it is the very thin tapered end is actually pointing in the direction of which the blood was traveling when those stains were distributed. So for this left-hand side, it would be downward. Over onto the right-hand side, that is actually a series of passive drip stains. And the directionality of the passive drip stains indicates relative motion heading towards the right, because you can see some of the stain becomes a little bit elongated and we have some spines that are actually traveling to the right. So that is just another tool that we use when we're interpreting the blood stains.
What are we looking at here?
That is a very classic projection patterns. And the projection patterns that you see there, the reason they look like they're arched is because they are from a breached artery. So it is the muscle, the heart actually pumping and then releasing, and it comes out in almost like an arcing formation if they're in proximity to a surface to see that. So you'll see the other thing that you can see with projection patterns, which help us to identify it, is some of the larger stains have enough volume that sometimes you'll see some of the blood actually start to flow down from it. So those are some of the characteristics that we look for projection.
What's this?
Those are large volumes. So this is blood that is just being allowed to accumulate on a surface. There's no real introduction of an outside force. We get a little bit more specific. If it's on a hard surface, it's called pooled blood. If it's on an absorbent surface, we call it a saturation.
Sorry, 1 second. And here on the next slide?
So this would be an example of drip stains and drip trails. And the stain in the top left corner on the actual TV, that is a passive drip stain that has come into contact with a rough surface. So when it made contact with the rough surface, the stain actually broke. And you can see that there's residual small stains around it. That's satellite spatter. As opposed to the drip stain that is on the right, that is more circular and doesn't appear to be as broken. And that's because that's on a smooth surface. So this is where you're starting to see that not only do we have to be aware of specific characteristics, physical characteristics of the stain, we also have to be very cognizant of the surface that it's on. And then a drip trail. So for example, that drip trail down there in the bottom left, I can't tell you if they were going to the right or to the left. So it is just a drip trail.
What are we looking at here on the slide entitled Satellite Spatter?
That is more demonstrative explanation of satellite spatter. And the difference in these is the one on the right-hand side, you can see a lot more of the small stains that are encompassing or radiating outward from that original stain. And what happens is if you have blood that continually starts to drip into itself, you'll start to have more blood that can bounce out and break. Another example would be the rainstorm. At the beginning of the rainstorm, the puddle's not that big. At the end of a big thunderstorm, it's much larger and you have many, many, many more stains radiating outward. Same phenomenon for blood. So you can either have just the blood dripping into itself where somebody is stationary, or if you have an injury that is profusely bleeding uninterrupted, you may get what we call rapid distribution of the blood. And then it basically pours down, for lack of a better term, and then you can also see that satellite spatter coming out.
What are we looking here? Non-horizontal surface.
So this is a drip stain that is actually on clothing. It's on a pair of jeans. And even though it is a drip stain, it looks completely different. A, because it's horizontal, it's dripping downward, and B, because it's on a textile. So once again, this is where we're getting into and having to look at a lot of different features. So you can see that the drip stain was traveling downward on here because it kind of breaks, but it still indicates somewhat of a directionality pointing downward.
And what do you mean by it breaks? Could you explain that?
When blood comes into contact with a textile, especially if it's not like a smooth textile, like a silk, if it's something that's got some coarseness to it, like a denim, or like a t-shirt, or if it's something that's got like ribbing to it or some special type of design embedded into it, the stain is going to bounce a little bit. So it's going to break because it's not one smooth surface as if we were to put a passive drip stain on a piece of glass that was horizontal. There's nothing on the glass to help it break. So that's what I mean by the stain is broken.
And so if we were looking at a stain like this, you would expect this, and I don't know if it's the correct word, but you expect this is basically one drop of blood. It hits the clothing and it's all one, but it sort of leaves individual little markings as it goes down.
Correct. We try to be respectful of the fact that there are going to be situations where we're not going to be able to exactly tell. So I would just call this passive dripping. It could be two stains right above each other, or it could be one large stain. But what we look at and focus is and interpret the fact that they are both going downwards, and that it was a horizontal type of distribution, or non-horizontal.
Now we move to cast off. What are we looking at here?
That is for example, a bloodied item releasing blood due to its motion. So that could be the rapid acceleration of an item or the rapid deceleration of an item. And sometimes you get cast off stains that form this very beautiful type of linear pattern, and you can see exactly where it started and exactly where it ended. And other times the item has been flung multiple times, or there's a change in swinging motion, or the actual surface it's coming off of is large. So you may just get what we call, for lack of a non-scientific term, you get like a mishmash of all these different stains and patterns, and they range in directionality and size. But as you can see, this looks completely different from like a passive drip stain.
Here's transfer and swipe. What's important about this?
This is where a surface is contaminated with wet blood, comes into contact with the surface and deposits the blood onto the surface. The one on the left is just a transfer. There's no discernible characteristics to it, whereas the one on the right is what we call a swipe. It just shows that the item that deposited that was in motion during the deposition, or the surface it was in motion during the deposition.
And you keep using the word deposition, but you don't mean deposition like lawyers conduct depositions.
Oh no, deposition, as the stain's being deposited.
Okay. Here's flow pattern. What do we know about this?
This is where the flow pattern, where the blood is allowed to just flow down based on the topography of whatever the item it's on, and the sheer fact that there's enough volume of blood that gravity is pulling it downward. So that's what the flow pattern would they look like. And then if there's movement by the target, you'll see an alteration and movement of the blood stain as it continues to flow down.
So the one on the right there where it's sort of bent, would that normally indicate to you like some kind of movement in the course of the blood flowing down the substance?
That's correct.
All right, that's that. I want to now talk with you about this case. You were asked to evaluate the evidence in this case, pictures and so on, correct?
Yes.
Tell us the kind of things that you looked at in this case and in the review of the file before you started coming to any sort of conclusions.
I requested and reviewed the photographs from the scene, and I received multiple photographs from multiple representatives of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. I also requested the autopsy photographs, as well as any documentation of any clothing that had been removed from Ms. Baker during the autopsy. I also requested and reviewed the 911 call. That was about 16 minutes long. I also reviewed Hillsborough County Medical Examiner. I reviewed their initial case summary report. I reviewed their report of what their actions were at the scene, as well as the official autopsy report that was authored by the medical examiner. I also was provided the toxicology report that was supplemented along with the autopsy report. I also reviewed some of the medical records for Mr. Matthew Terry. He had been received treatment for some of his injuries, and I wanted to review those items as well. I also reviewed the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office reports, and that would include the first responder reports, because there were multiple individuals who responded to the scene and conducted the investigation. That also included the crime scene technician reports. I also reviewed those. And then I was provided Florida Department of Law Enforcement DNA reports as well. And I also, after reviewing that, completed documentation of my own.
All right. So I want to start showing you some photos. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 41B. Let me zoom out here. Is this one of the photos that you looked at?
Yes.
All right. And so here we can see a variety of crime scene markers, T, S, R, Q, and on the fence, it's a little hard to see, but I believe that's CC, like Charlie, Charlie. Did you review all of these?
I did.
All right. So I want to start with letter R, which is depicted here in State's Exhibit 41J. That's a little better. Also depicted in State's 41K. And then 41L. And then 41M. And I want to talk with you first about this part in 41M. Did you have a chance to go out to the scene?
Not the night of the incident.
Did you have a chance to go out to the scene somewhere afterwards?
I did.
Were you able to find this general area of the home at 6211, that's sort of the little alleyway between 6209 and 6211, that sort of area that's depicted in these photos?
Yes, I did physically see that area.
All right. And so, assuming this is 6211, there is this red stain on this wall. What can you tell me about this?
That is a projection pattern.
And how do you know it's a projection pattern?
The characteristics of it were very indicative of a projection pattern, including the basic undulation appearance of it. So it actually arcs up and down. You also have the rather large parent staining, where it's the larger, more circular stains, and then you have the smaller flow patterns that are coming down. And that's just because there was a volume of blood that was sufficient enough that the blood began to flow down. And I look at all of the photographs. I looked at all the photographs in this case before I ever read a report, even the medical examiner's report. And I actually remember thinking to myself, I need to look at medical reports to see if somebody has a artery injury, because that was very indicative of that to me. And so that's what it was, the interest of the pattern itself.
All right, and so I'm going to zoom in just so everyone can see, but that looks like a tape measure next to it, and it looks like this arch on the wall is no taller than, at best, maybe 10 or 11 inches off the ground, correct?
That's correct.
Based on the position of this arch on the wall, as well as the portion of the ground you can see in front of it here, and given the tape measurements both up the wall and away from the wall through the yard, can you tell me anything about the position of the person who would have been spraying blood from their artery when this mark is made on the wall?
The artery that was distributing this blood was in very close proximity to that portion of the wall and was very low to the ground.
All right. And so when you say close proximity, as we're looking here in State's Exhibit 41L, it looks like the blood goes about as far as maybe 36 inches out. Is that what you mean by close proximity, or you mean something closer than that?
I would say that it's even closer to the wall, because the actual stain that I identified as the projection pattern itself is on the wall, and then it kind of continues down onto the ground where the wall immediately abuts up against the sandy area. So that would indicate that the artery, as it's releasing blood because it's been breached, is in very close proximity to that wall.
And you say the person must be very low to the ground. In this case, you were able to see the pictures of Kay Baker, correct?
I not only saw the photographs, I also read the autopsy report.
All right. And obviously then you know that she has a pretty large wound to the left side of her neck.
Correct.
How low does she have to be to the ground in order to form this pattern on the wall? I mean, could she be standing upright?
I associated this projection pattern with coming from the breached carotid, as it was indicated in the medical examiner report. There were no other indications of arteries that had been transcended, violated, or injured, so that I attributed to her carotid, which means the left side of her neck had to be in proximity to that lower portion of the wall.
All right, but what I'm asking is, can you tell me any indication as to how high up her neck was from the ground? Could she have been standing up?
I would exclude her being standing up. I would include that she is her neck is low to the ground, just above the ground.
So, for example, if she was laying on her back with her left side exposed to the wall, would that be something that could be consistent with this pattern?
I cannot exclude that.
If alternatively I turn it the other direction, now she's sort of face down, either laying on her stomach or just barely on her hands and knees, and her neck is again exposed to the left side of the wall. Is that consistent with this mark on the wall?
That is also something that cannot be excluded.
But she would have to be somewhere in the position of like either laying on her back, her neck is that low to the ground, or like very low to the ground on her hands and knees, somewhere where her neck is very close to the ground.
Very close to the ground and close to that wall.
Yes, sir.
So if this is a good time, or
I'll just take it right now, it's fine.
all right, ladies and gentlemen, you've been sitting for more than an hour and a half, so I'm going to go ahead and give you your afternoon break. Please do not discuss the case amongst yourselves with anyone else. Please do not do any research related to the case, and avoid all reports of the case outside of the courtroom. All rise for the jury. Jury has exited. Everyone may be seated. Ma'am, you may step down and enjoy the break as well. They have a certain schedule that they expect breaks on, so we're past that time. But you are still on the stand, so do not discuss your testimony with anyone. Mr. Diaz, just give me an idea approximately how much longer do you think you have for this witness?
At least 30 minutes, I'm sure.
Okay, and then the cross, so that's going to take us, we come back at 4:30. Cross 5. All right.
We're happy to go late if you'd like.
I'll ask them. Yeah, I don't mind. Yeah. Enjoy the break.
Okay.
Where's the ex-girlfriend? What happened to her? Don't tell me it's going to be tomorrow, because I wanted to cover the Daryl Brooks case tomorrow. Well, we will finish this blood splatter witness, because it is kind of interesting now that they've gotten the coursework out of the way. Now that we all know how to do it, or how to bleed out on a stucco wall if you've been stabbed. Maybe she ran into the forest. She exited a bedroom window and then ran behind her home to another home, and then he went out the front door and went down a tree line. That's where they found him. So there was blood everywhere, just everywhere. It was crazy. So we will take a little break and stay with it until 5 o'clock. I mean, what else do we have to do? Well, you guys have stuff to do. I'm just down in painting. I don't mind staying here with you. It's fun to see all my friends here. I see Sherry popped in. Nice to see you, Sherry. She chickened out. I hope not. If she's subpoenaed, she can't chicken out. She's coming from Michigan, so I would imagine she flew in over the weekend, probably prepared to testify today. So that the state's going to have to put her up in a hotel for the night. You love how murder brings us together. Hey, if you need a good place, a safe place to come and talk to your friends and finish your diamond painting, I'm happy to provide you with entertainment. Why not? Did you see Pearl jump up on the back of my chair and then stab me in the back? She's just looking at me. Yes, I'm talking about you. You stabbed me in the back. Stitch, he's outside. He was insisted to go out there, and it's freezing out there. We're expecting like snow any minute now. Well, probably about 4:30, 5 o'clock. But they're on the East Coast, so it is 3:45 right now over there. So this witness will be there for the rest of the day, I'm sure. So much for the defense, state resting their case today. She wants to murder you. Oh my God. Last night I came in here. Every single thing that I had up here was knocked over. Yarn was out of the, onto the floor. That's Pearl all day long. Pearl is behind that for sure. So I kicked her. I straightened it all back up, kicked her out, put the yarn away. She loves to mess with this stuff. I don't know why. I'm watching the stream on the small window, the backstage, as that we call it. And they've got the clock on the screen. So when they come back, I'll turn it back on. We thought Stitch was the instigator, but it was Pearl. Oh, when he was on the back of my chair, he stabbed me in the back. She stabbed me in the back. 66 in California. It is right. Let me see what the temperature is right now here. Oh my goodness. Whoa. I'm sorry. I didn't go to sleep till 2:30 in the morning last night. I'm still having trouble getting, once I'm asleep, I'm good, but trouble falling asleep, it's crazy. Feels like 39, so it may not snow. It may just be a rain. We'll just get rain, but I don't know. I wanted to go down to the bins today. I wanted to film me going through I was going to put the GoPro right here instead of having it here. I wanted to make sure you guys could see what I see when I'm looking through the bins. But I got to the gas station, fill up my car with gas, and I get in after there, and the car won't start. I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? So I finally get the car to start. I drive to the post office because I had several packages I needed to drop off for the business. Get back in the car, it won't start. I'm like, oh no, I cannot go. I can't go because I clearly need a new battery. So I drove to Meineke, which is like around the corner, because I was afraid to go anywhere else and stop because I didn't think I'd be able to get it restarted. So $300 later, I know 300. I'm just cringing because I have a new battery, but yeah, it was a battery. So I get back home. And then when I left Meineke, after sitting there, they didn't make me wait too long, like half an hour. And it was funny because they had the trial on in the lobby of Meineke. So I'm teaching other people what's going on in the trial. And they're like, oh my God, he did what? I'm like, yeah. And so when I left, it was snowing. It was snowing, not just really light, but so I just said I shouldn't be driving in this kind of weather anyway. So I just came back home and said, I'll just put on the live feed for you guys and we'll just visit with each other. And then unemployment finally called. Yay! They cleared off they said they just had to confirm my identity. They cleared the fraud case off my file and I can now get unemployment. So they're putting all of the back pay into my bank account. Oh, thank God. But tomorrow, my plan was to cover the Daryl Brooks case because he's going to come in first thing and talk about subject matter jurisdiction. Then he's going to tell the judge that he's not prepared to go forward with the hearing because he didn't have enough time to get all his people together. Because she only gave him like a couple of weeks to get all his people together. But what I anticipate we'll hear tomorrow will be a lot of the victims will be talking. They'll be giving their victim impact statements. It'll be a very sad day, but it'll also be entertaining in that I'm sure Daryl Brooks is going to probably be thrown out of the courtroom, put into the next courtroom. I'm curious if anybody will speak on his behalf. I'm going to bet no. I'm going to bet he doesn't have one person speak. He said he was going to have about 20 people speak. I'm guessing none. So I'm going to cover that tomorrow, and maybe we can go back and forth between the two. I don't know. We'll see. I can have one on one screen, one on the other, and we can, we'll see. Yeah, the unemployment thing was really bothering me because, I need that money till my business gets off the ground. It's just, I am making sales. I'm at the post office almost every day. They know me now, but it's not enough to pay the rent. Not yet. And Christmas is coming. Oh, my goodness. But I found a cool gift to get my son and his wife, and it's not expensive. My son and his wife like doing puzzles, and I've been really into puzzles the last week or so, ever since Donnie, Diamond Painting with Donnie and I were talking, and she turned me on to this YouTuber that's a puzzle person. She's called Karen Puzzles, and I listened to this thing last night. She from Ravensburger, you can order a custom puzzle. So if I put pictures together of my son and his wife and their family, I can order a custom puzzle with all these pictures on it. And it would be like $45 with a 20% off discount that the YouTuber gives you. And I think it would be a neat gift because I can't afford to get everybody like something this year. They're all teenagers. They understand. They know, So, but I think the puzzle my son and his wife would enjoy that. They've always got a puzzle sitting on their dining room table. It is cool, Sherry. I wouldn't want one because it would take me forever to put together. When I work on a puzzle, it takes me forever. I'm working on the one that Jean and I started earlier this year, and then we covered it up until the cats got grown because the cats were they were really small at the time we started it. Well, they were still really small then, but now they just leave it alone. They could care less about it. Stitch was in his little bed one night watching me do it. And he was just completely enthralled watching the puzzle, but he never touched it, and they haven't touched it so far. So, Sahar Hadari, please support. Okay. Yes, please. Please hit the like button on your way in or out today. If you're enjoying the content, there is a super chat button also, and please consider becoming a subscriber. I always enjoy the subscribers. Okay. I'm seeing movement, around the clock on the other screen. They should be coming back anytime now. I can put the other screen on, but that's all you're going to see right now. The clock. I am so sorry you guys had to sit through such boring testimony today. I really thought it was going to be the girlfriend. They can't not put her on. They have to put her on because unless they're afraid that it's going to be, if they put her on, it'll be reversed on appeal, because appellate judges don't really like when prior bad acts get added into the mix. And But this one is so incredibly sir. He took a knife out of their kitchen block, which is what we think happened in this case, and he stabbed, bludgeoned her, and punched her in the head, to the point where, I mean, it's incredible that the woman survived. And then he pleads not guilty, goes to trial, gets found guilty of a lesser included offense of just great bodily injury, serves 3 years and 1 year parole, and that was it. And the state attorney for Michigan wrote a letter to the parole board saying that if they don't supervise this guy closer for longer, he's just going to do it again. And look what he did. It happened again. He moves to Florida. It happens again. So I hope he doesn't get off, because I would hate for some poor unsuspecting woman to fall prey to this guy for a third time. That would be just awful. But I don't know like any of the specifics. I know he was just in a relationship with the woman that he attacked previously. And I mean, here we think that he was upset because he thought she was dancing with another man when they were out drinking earlier in the evening, and which is not really true. We all saw the video. It was nothing at all. He was making a mountain out of a molehill. I am so thirsty in this weather. It is so dry outside. Oh my gosh. They are taking a long break. The jury's like, I can't do it anymore. Please, no more blood splatter. Yeah. The DNA, oh my God. The blood splatter was not foreign to me, because I watched that, the same thing last week with the blood splatter expert in the George Wagner case. I'm like, oh, again with the blood splatter? Yeah. Because they did the same thing. They hired a private consultant in the Wagner case. The defense hired a private consultant, hoping that this consultant would be able to look at the blood splatter and tell the jury that it was only one person that committed all those murders. And he couldn't say that. Nobody could say that, especially when they found 2 different size footprints, 2 different size bloody footprints at the crime scene, the first crime scene. There were 4 crime scenes on that case. All right, we're still watching the clock. I need to get my watercolor paint back out. I haven't done any. I want to make some Christmas cards. I haven't done any watercoloring in a couple of weeks since I started that miniature, which I haven't worked on since last Thursday. I worked on it for a little while. I can already tell you, though, it is not a craft I will be repeating. No. Once this is done, it's done. Not ordering anymore. No, not going to do it. Just like the rock painting, Jen, not going to happen. Mm-mm. If it involves glue, I don't want nothing to do with it, honestly. No. But you have to try it to see if you like it. I want to find that plastic yarn, the plarn, so I can see if I could crochet with the plastic yarn. I think that'd be totally cool to try that. Oh, I'm going to finish it. You're going to get a camper. It may not, it's going to look like the camper is really old. It's been through hell, but you're going to get a camper. There will be a camper sitting right up here by the end of December. Yep. But nothing else. Crashley made me save this dollhouse, this scary dollhouse that she wanted us to do together. No. God, I remember this time last year, I was looking forward to the all of the Black Friday sales and stuff, but not this year. No. Like DAC had an incredible painting came out on Saturday that was beautiful, really pretty. But not going there. All right, are we still on the clock? Come on. Is there still a line at the restroom? Like a tornado hit it. Yes, Diamond Queen. I'll just call it the storm chasing camper. That's funny. Sherry, which painting? Oh, on Saturday? Oh, I'll show you which painting I fell in love with. Oh my God, it's ridiculous. It's probably sold out, I would imagine. Because it's stunning. Here it is. Let's see. Diamond Art Club. This one. Oh my God. I just gasped when I saw it. It's so pretty. And it comes with like a special diamond. It's by John Ross McKimmey, 55 by 76 centimeters, which is not incredibly large, 33 colors, 2 ABs, and 1 iridescent diamond. That is going to be totally cool. I don't know which part the diamond would go into, though. There's several places it could go, but awesome. And I can imagine they're charging a pretty penny for it. Marty's not buying any more kits for now either. I love that I already have. Yeah, I sold what I thought I wasn't going to get to, and I love what I have left, and I'll get to it. You know, I'm going to start the year fantasy in January with. I'm going to be doing the Diamond Art Club, the Dragon's Door. I'm going to start that one in January, and it is. I've got to order some special drills for that one. I'm going to get me some metallic drills and just go crazy with that painting. So I'm trying to get this one done. This is the one I'm working on is it's a Dreamer design. It's a Christmas tree and it's got the lighthouse in the background and a little boat sailing by and gumdrops. You know, it's a little bit of fantasy in it. It's got these like little steps that look like gumdrops that we purchased last year. All right, come on. Let's get back to work here. We're getting an up close view of the defendant's neck. Okay, with judges back on the bench. You may do a year of Chuck, but I have 2 events you're going to do for sure. Cool. We will be, Mickey and I are going to be having another mystery diamond painting event, first part of the year, and then the second half of the year, we will do another Great Escape. So those will be our 2 events for the year. Okay. Just turn the mic on. I don't recognize this judge. You know, I practiced in Hillsborough for a number of years, but well, obviously I wasn't in criminal court. I was in civil, so that's probably why I don't know him. Halloween. I'll do Halloween with you next year. We can, since our 4th annual was sort of a wash, we'll just skip to the 5th one. 5th annual Halloween event with Jen. But it has to be a fantasy canvas. Of course, it's Halloween, so it'll be fantasy, but Mad for Disney March and my dad's event in June. Oh, nice. You won't be pregnant and you'll be ready to go. I missed you too, Jennifer. I missed doing a Halloween event. I really did. I did a Halloween canvas. I just did like the Wizardy Cat. It was very quick. I had fun with it. I blinged out the crystal ball. It was fun. I love doing those little snack size paintings. It took me like a week and a half to do that one. Because it was a partial, that's why. But the two partials I've done, I've really enjoyed. Alice in the Bottle and the one I just mentioned. Okay, we have humans. We have a microphone. Once this gets underway, I'm going to run in the kitchen and get a drink real quick.
Jury is present and seated. Everyone else may be seated at this time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome back. Everyone looks refreshed. I hope that the break was long enough. Let me ask you, though, as I normally do after breaks, did anybody discuss anything about the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else?
No, we didn't discuss it at all, did we? No.
Does anybody
Not at all.
anything about the case out of the courtroom?
No.
Let the record reflect there are no hands. Again, thank you all very much. We're going to pick up where we left off. Mr. Diaz, you may proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Cox, when we left off, we were looking at stage 41L, this unique looking arch pattern on the wall. In all the other pictures that you saw and all the other evidence that you're aware of having reviewed the case, do you see any other place? Are there any other projection patterns anywhere that leads you to think there's arterial spray any place other than?
No.
So now I want to draw your attention to marker S. Here's State's Exhibit 41I. And again, there's a ruler. The 3-foot mark is right here. So this looks like it's within 3 feet, but there's no projection pattern. Is that correct?
Correct.
So what do you notice about this that's of interest?
What was of interest regarding this particular pattern is it is a saturation pattern to the ground. And while there was saturation to the ground also under the projection pattern, there were also a couple of passive drip stains that were around the saturation under photo marker R. I didn't see any of that over here at S. So this had, and I don't see any satellite spatter around this particular stain either. So first of all, when I identified it as a saturation pattern, that just means that the individual who was bleeding in this area, they were allowed to bleed there for a period of time. And it's most consistent with them being in very close proximity to the ground or laying on the ground, because I don't have any of the bouncing satellite spatter and I didn't have any projection patterns on the wall.
All right. And now I want to turn to marker T as depicted in States 41F. What are we looking at here?
That is a large saturation pattern. And actually some of the saturation has begun to follow the topography of the ground, and it has started to travel to different areas based on the topography of the ground, the different structures of the ground. So, and this area, some of the blood looks like it may have begun to coagulate or to clot a little bit. So, and what was interesting of that is that was in proximity to where Miss Baker was documented in the scene photographs where she was documented. And so that was just confirmation that once she came to that location, she was in that area until she was documented.
This is the area where she would have ultimately have come to rest.
Correct.
Even before the neighbor found her, this is still consistent with this is the final place that she was at.
Yes, that is consistent with all the other evidence that I reviewed in this particular case. I have no reason to believe that once she went to that area, she went anywhere else.
All right, I want to talk with you about States Exhibit 41D, and then a further close-in shot 41E. What, if anything, did you notice about this?
This is an area of unique staining, and I actually spent a lot of time looking at the photographs of these particular stains and patterns. And I came to the conclusion, based off of all the other scene-specific variables and what the other stains and patterns were telling me as I was looking, this is consistent in appearance with what I consider to be cast-off. I originally was trying to consider whether it was passive drip staining as opposed to cast off, which required me to look at the ground below it to see if there was any other subsequent stains like saturation that would allow me to differentiate that that was passive. I didn't see any of that. So I thought, well, based on the fact that I know she's in area R at a point, and then she's in area T, I felt, I believe, based on the scene specific variables and information, that is most likely cast off from her moving to that final resting position, her abrupt movement to that resting position. And I also cannot exclude when she was rolled over. So I also was aware of that via the 911 call. So all of those taken into consideration allow me to identify that as cast off.
But in your opinion, having reviewed all of these different photos that we're looking at, marker R, which you know to be Kay Baker's have been identified as the person whose blood that is.
Yes.
Then moving to marker S, moving to marker T, and ultimately the cast off, which is marker DD, which is again indicating, DNA is indicating is Kay Baker's blood. Does all of this suggest to you that there was an ongoing struggle there in the yard of some kind?
There was there was movement between R and T, and the proximity of the stains in relationship to each other and their overall appearance, as well as the information provided to me, not only in the photographs that I saw of Miss Baker, but of the medical documentation through the medical examiner's report that would indicate movement of Miss Baker.
All right, and I'm going to put up States Exhibit 65B or 64B, sorry, and zoom in for a second. Again, we looked at R, S, T, and DD. Did you also look at pictures related to BB and AA?
I did.
All right, so let's look at those pictures a second. And did you see the FDLE analysts who ultimately concluded that that was a mixture of blood?
Yes, I did review that report.
All right, so here's States Exhibit 41T, and I'll zoom in just so people can orient them. BB is to the left, AA is to the right. And then I'm going to show, here's 41U, 41V, and ultimately 41W, which is related to BB per the marker. What can you tell us about this?
I identified and interpreted those stains to be cast off stains as well. And they look visually different than the cast off stains that were documented in area DD on the front porch. And that is because the abrupt movement of the bloodied item is different. So that's another thing that I have to take in consideration. And the reason I can tell that the movement is different is because the stains or on the front porch were larger in size. They also exhibited directionality that was was towards the porch, towards the road. And the reason that they were larger is because the item that distributed those did not have a lot of momentum. Because the more momentum or the more force that you introduce that breaks the natural laws of physics and it's no longer a passive stain, the introduction of that force, as the force gets greater, the stains get smaller. So that is how I can determine that these stains appear in not only their distribution, their elongated size, as well as their relationship to each other. This is indicative of an item that has momentum that is moving towards the backyards. So these cast-offs are completely different incidents.
So I'm going to put the picture, but put 64B back up again. Are you saying that based on the markings of BB and AA, they indicate to you that they were created by a person moving away? If the road was over here, they're moving away from the road towards the backyard.
Yes, the item that is contaminated with the mixture of blood at BB the directionality is toward the backyard.
Okay. And you're aware that BB is indicated as being Kay Baker and Matthew Terry in the mixture?
Yes.
Does this indicate to you that Mr. Terry then had to be somewhere in that vicinity, or his blood at least had to be somewhere in that vicinity to get into the mixture and then get cast off onto the wall?
Yes. So bloodletting had to have already occurred for Mr. Terry.
I want to next talk about as we look at states 54B, there are a variety of things that are, and again, this is your diagram. Is this to scale?
No.
Okay, so this is not to
No.
scale, but there's a variety of markers moving up here, Z, Y, X, so on and so forth, getting all the way to U. Do you remember looking at marker U in the pictures?
I do.
Here states 42S. What did you note about this?
The first thing that I noted is that it is a transfer stain. So an item contaminated with wet blood came into contact with the north side, or the side of the fence that is close to the roadway. It's kind of on the corner. And so the actual residences would be towards the back of the photograph. So the first thing that I noticed was that there's a transfer stain there. There's also a transfer stain adjacent to it on the actual edge of the fence. And then there's another transfer stain down on the bottom. So those in proximity to each other indicates to me that an individual or item contaminated with wet blood, possibly on multiple areas, had contact with that fence. Or if it's just one area that's contaminated, it had multiple contacts. So either some individual or item has blood on multiple areas, or one area is having multiple contacts with that portion of the fence.
Do you know what ridge detail is?
I do.
What is ridge detail?
Ridge detail is the skin on your fingertips and your feet, which allows you to grip things. It gives you a bit of a texture on there. And ridge detail, a lot of people call them fingerprints, but ridge detail is what we use in the discipline of forensic science. So ridge detail would be the different ridges and bifurcations and things that could possibly allow you to be identified if there was comparable detail.
Were you able to see anything in this picture that was ridge detail?
I did not physically see ridge detail. No.
The fact that you cannot see ridge detail, does that mean this cannot be effectively a handprint on a fence?
No, actually, it has characteristics consistent with the handprint, so I would not exclude a handprint.
Like, for example, this could be one finger, another finger, another finger, and another finger, 4 fingers on a fence.
Yes, and the way that I would describe this is it's linear patterns separated by relatively evenly spaced voids, and it does have attributes that is possibly consistent with a hand. I can't exclude a hand.
And are you aware that DNA analysis said that this was a mixture that had Kay Baker and Matthew Terry included as contributors to this 2-person mixture?
Yes.
So if this was a hand that had both the defendant and the victim's blood on the hand, and it was placed on this fence for some reason, is there anything about this that is inconsistent with that theory?
That the hand had a mixture? No, that's consistent.
Well, I mean, that's according to the DNA, which you're not here to testify to, but assuming that's what the DNA said, assuming there was a bloody hand, and that blood was the mixture that we're talking about, is this consistent with potentially a hand being placed on a fence?
Yes, it cannot be excluded.
Now, I want to talk with you about the fence line in general. I'm not going to do every single photo of the fence line, but we can see it going up one direction towards the bushes in A, and then looking back the other direction towards where the victim would have come to rest in picture L. There are a series of stains along this fence and one on the ground, correct?
That is correct.
From those stains, can you tell anything about directionality? Can you say that they were created by a person, for example, running towards the bushes, or created by a person, for example, running away from the bushes?
The stains and patterns exhibited different characteristics. So the only stains and patterns that potentially had any type of indication of directionality, there was one area of a relatively large amount of stains, but I cannot identify whether the item that touched it, whether it was going down, going back, or both.
So going back to states 64B, is there anything about any of the blood there along, because you already told us a directionality for A and B. So for these other ones, Z, Y, X, all the way through U, including the P, that's the ground marker. Is there anything about those markers that rule out the possibility that a person could have, for example, moved one direction and then decided to double back?
I can't exclude that. I have no definitive information to exclude that.
All right, so now we're going to look at markers that start moving across 6209 towards 6207. So give me 1 second to grab all those. So for example, here is States Exhibit 43C. We can see O and N, and if I zoom in, you can see M and J. You looked at all these markers, correct?
I did.
Can you tell us anything about these? Are these a trail?
I did not identify that as a blood trail, no.
Okay. And so I want to differentiate again for the jury to understand. I think for the average person, we think of a trail, like a trail of breadcrumbs, right? Like there's one here, and if I go a little bit further, there's one there, and if there's another one a little further, I call that a trail as sort of an everyday common person, like sort of like connect the dots. But do you use the word blood trail differently?
Yes, by definition, the blood trail is for passive drip stains. We use that terminology when we're defining a trail from one point to another of passive drip staining. And one of the characteristics that we look at when we identify that is we're looking for continuity to the stains. So for example, we're looking at the stains are relatively the same size, they're relatively the same shape. They appear to be deposited by an action that was continuous as opposed to a disjointed type of stain and pattern. And those characteristics were not evident because I did look at the close-ups of all of these photo markers, and there was nothing distinct to me that I identified as a trail like I did in other areas of this scene.
So going back again for a second to state 64B, because they're laid out in a alphabetical fashion, is that suggesting that that's the order in which they were created?
I did not interpret it that way. And that is where, having been a crime scene investigator and having had the experience of working scenes, especially when you're one of the first people there to document the scene, I did not put that as to why those markers were placed in those particular places.
All right. So whatever sequence the letters are in, even if they're alphabetical, that does not necessarily mean that that's the sequence the blood is deposited on the ground.
That's not how I interpreted it, no.
I mean, for example, M, N, and O, can you tell a directionality of movement?
I cannot.
So it's equally possible that a person, if these were sequential, if they were, it could be a person going M, N, O, or it could be a person going O, N, M, correct?
Correct.
Or it could be a person going O to M, back to N, and then moving towards J, for example.
Correct.
I want to talk with you about states 43J, specifically this marker, green J. Now let me find a close-up shot of that particular marker. What are you seeing here in states 43O as it relates to the green J? And I'll just, because it's so zoomed in, I'll back up a second. Here's states 43N and then 43O. What can you tell us about this?
Some of the blood stains that were in the backyards, I was not able to specifically identify a particular type of stain based on its characteristics, and that was because of the dynamics of this particular scene. However, for photo marker J, I did identify it as a small pool of blood, and then a small area of saturation to a petal. So that was indicative of a blood source bleeding in that area, such that the deposition was had enough blood volume that it caused the blood to actually pool onto the leaf and then actually saturate a leaf. So that's what those particular stains indicated to me.
All right, and you use the word pool, but I noticed there's this like scale or ruler here, correct?
Yes.
Let me see if I turn that off, if that helps at all. The actual mark is here in this area, sort of the dead center of the photo, correct?
Well, the scale, and based on the experience of our using scales and having used this scale, it's a representative sampling that is being documented. So I was also looking at distance photographs, the mid-range, and then the close-ups, because you can see that the stain's not continuous. There's one stain to the left, one stain to the right, which is.
What
yes.
I want to get out is you call this a pool, but according to this is measured in centimeters, correct?
Yes.
This is not feet of blood.
No. So pooling is just the characteristic of it. The fact that the blood had pooled together into one area and it hadn't saturated down, and it was larger than a traditional drip a drip stain, I should say.
All right. And are you aware that the FDLE analysis suggested that this was a single source contributor from Mr. Terry?
I am aware of that, yes.
Okay, so again, Mr. Terry's blood somehow has to be getting onto the ground there at marker J. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell from that whether that's coming from a cut in his neck, a cut on his hand, a bloody nose, whatever the case may be?
I can't tell.
But something that's producing the blood of Mr. Terry is then allowing it to spill onto the ground. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I want to now move over to the next batch of photos as we get to, as depicted here in state 64A, this cluster over here, the sort of A, B, C, through I and J there. Now, these appear to be much more heavily clustered than, for example, N and O and M and L. Those seem fairly spaced out by comparison. I know this is not to scale, but did you observe, looking at these pictures, that there is a greater concentration or clustering of blood droplets here?
Yes.
And what does that indicate to you?
That indicates that an individual was bleeding, was moving around this area to multiple locations, and it was confined to the area around the jungle gym because there were many stains on the side of the jungle gym that is facing the photo markers.
And let me just show the jury that for a second. Here states 44C. Is this what you're talking about in the fact that there are multiple places or multiple stains on the jungle gym?
Yes, and the interesting thing that allows me to identify that as an individual who's bleeding is because of the stains also on the jungle gym. A lot of them were passive drip stains, and a lot of them were dripped not only on the actual metal bars, but also on the base of the frame, which indicates, based on where the scales are, as you can see in these photographs, that means that a passive drip stain, that blood source has to be above that area. So this is not an individual that's, at least over by the jungle gym, crawling around. This blood source where the different scales are is above those areas, and it's dripping down. And then as you get progressively closer to that fence line and progressively closer to the foliage, you're starting to see a larger volume of blood, and I'm starting to see drip trails.
Is this 44A?
Yes.
All right, so now you're actually calling something a drip trail.
Yes.
All right, and so tell us where you're seeing that and what that means to you.
Photo markers A and photo marker B, those photo markers don't just represent one single stain. There's actually multiple stains, especially in photo marker A and B, that are spaced out, and they're like saturation patterns. And then you can actually see a drip trail almost connect them.
All right, and we're looking at states 44A, and there's actually two A's here. So let me clarify. When you say A to B, do you mean green A or red A?
Green A.
So you're talking from here at the far left of this picture over here to the marker B, you're seeing drip trails.
Correct.
all of the blood that you're seeing here at these various locations, all of these different markers, A, B, C, all the green ones at least, is this consistent with a person who is lingering in the area for some period of time? And I don't mean like hours, but I mean at least a few seconds or minutes.
That is consistent, yes.
All right. So now I want to turn to that red marker A. So now as we start looking at these red markers, A, B, C, D, moving E, moving through the bushes, what do you notice about them that is of interest?
That there are blood stains and patterns that is on leaves on the ground at red A, and then there are blood stains and that are on the foliage at photo markers B through E. So that indicates an individual with blood on their person and or a bleeding injury is in that foliage.
And so I want to show you a group of photos here from State's Exhibit number 51. Here's 51D, and then E, F, G, and then H. This is all area A, correct?
Yes,
There's actually a couple different spots there where there appears to be blood, correct?
correct.
And you're aware that this was one of the areas that was submitted for analysis and came back to Mr. Terry as the sole contributor, correct?
Yes,
The single source as it was.
yes.
These dots or drops, as depicted here in 51E, don't appear to be particularly large. What, if anything, does that tell you?
That either the source of blood was not in that area for an extended period of time, or there wasn't sufficient blood to cause more staining.
Either the person was moving through the area pretty quickly or they weren't bleeding a lot.
Either or.
Now,
Or both.
As we use this photo, because I don't want to go through every single photo, but is this generally roughly the size or the amount of blood that you're seeing as the person is moving through the bushes, or are you seeing large concentrations of blood moving through the bushes?
I didn't see the large concentration of blood that I did by the jungle gym area. There were some leaves and some stems that did have blood deposition on their entirety, but I didn't see any large areas like I did by the jungle gym.
Now, I want to ask you about your diagram here so it doesn't cause any confusion later. I'm going to show you 54 or 64A, and you created this, correct?
I did.
And it says that it's not to scale, but I want to talk with you just a little briefly here about this sort of left end of the picture. You put in the representation for the bushes and the trees and the whatever, correct?
Yes, it's a standardized computer aided diagramming program that I use.
All right. And so if a person was looking at this picture, they might think to themselves, over here where A, B, C, D, and E is, it's pretty wide, the bush. Whereas over here by where U is, the bush looks pretty thin. Did you do this intentionally because the area by U is any less dense or less thick than the area over by A?
No,
Was the foliage there pretty uniform, running up and down Lithia pine crest?
yes, and those areas to the left of the sketch, there was a lot of like foliage and bushes and scrub and all that. And then as you get a little bit further down, you still have the scrub and the bushes, but then you're also starting to see some trees.
I want to return for a moment to the victim herself. Did you have a chance to see the condition of the victim as she was at the scene?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of her position before the neighbor found her?
I listened to the 911 call, and my understanding from listening to the 911 call was that she had to be rolled in order for medical intervention for appropriate medical intervention to occur. And that was beneficial to me, because one of the first things I looked at when I looked at the blood stain at T and then the location of her position, I actually said to myself before I listened or read any reports, I'm like, who moved her? So when I listened to the 911 call, that provided me that information.
But more specifically, as part of the information that was provided by the neighbor, did you see an indication that she was left side up, right side down to the ground?
There was blood staining on her person that was consistent with her being on her right side with her left side up.
And I want to show you State's Exhibit number 1 for a moment. Do you notice anything of interest between the left side and the right side of Miss Baker's face?
This was one of the primary things that made me think who at least moved her head. And that is on her forehead. She has flow patterns that are traveling across her forehead, which is not consistent with the position that she's in. So that indicates to me that at some point her forehead is turned. And then as you look on the right side, the right temple area, you can see that there what we call a void of blood, which means that area was not available to receive blood as it was flowing down her forehead, which is consistent with that area being in contact with the ground. And then because she had a large amount of blood on the left side of her face.
So if the neighbor were to say that he found her on the ground with her head on the ground, the right side against the ground, and her left shoulder in the air, is the blood pattern as depicted on her face consistent with that?
Yes.
That would suggest that that was the position she was in when he found her and that she hadn't been moved before then. Is that correct?
Correct.
I want to talk to you about Miss Baker's clothing. Did you have a chance ultimately to go and inspect the clothes that were taken from Miss Baker's body?
I did.
And those objects are here in evidence. I'm not going to pull them out because they're still biohazards, but I want to show you State's Exhibit 78D. Tell me what we're looking at here.
So there on her legs, one of the things that I identified was I began to identify the types of stains and patterns that were visually on the pant legs. So I identified areas of saturation. I identified passive drip stains, some with satellite spatter. So I began my process with doing the basic identification of the stains and patterns. So, and I'm looking at them in relationship to each other. So I go and I identify the different stains and patterns, and then I start to look at their appearance in relationship to each other. So what was interesting to me was the location of the saturation stains on her pant legs. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, she doesn't have any corresponding stains on the upper portion of her jeans, like her waistband and her pocket areas. So as I go through and I'm analyzing and I'm interpreting these stains, what I'm trying to do is to see if I can determine the most probable way of those stains being deposited. And what allows me to do that is the location of them on her clothing, the overall appearance of them, their relationship to each other, as well as did any of the stains have what I consider to be directionality, and some of the passive drip stains did.
We're going to talk about directionality, but I just want to first, before we get to there, I want to draw your attention to the space of ground that runs between her legs. Did you notice anything about that?
Yes, I actually looked to see whether or not there were what we call reciprocating stains around her person. So one of the key areas that I really did focus in on was between her legs, because what I'm at this point trying to determine is it possible that those stains and patterns were deposited on her jeans when she's rolled over in that position? And I did not see any reciprocating saturation to the ground between her legs.
There's no blood on the ground here, correct?
Correct.
And she's moved, obviously. So is there any chance that now that you saw the pictures of the ground from all the other different angles of the pictures, do you see anything that looks like a little thin little V area that would have been between her legs where blood would have been deposited?
No, and I intentionally all the photographs before she's removed and after she's removed, because I wanted to make sure that I was cognizant that I was looking at all the photographs available to me.
So let's talk about the time that you had a chance to look at the pictures directly in evidence. I'm going to turn to States Exhibit 65, A through M. Did you take this photo as depicted in 65A?
I did.
And then 65B,
Yes.
65C,
Yes.
and 65D?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to go back to this one, 65A. Can you tell us about directionality? Because you started to talk about directionality and I cut you off.
What I was looking at directionality, the stains that were immediately brought to my attention are the passive drip stains that are basically in the groin area of her jeans. They have directionality that travels towards the inner seam and towards what would be like the interior area of the groin area. So that allowed me to determine that the blood source was above the groin area and it was going slightly down towards the interior seam of the legs as well as the groin area. And the other thing that also allowed me to determine that the blood source was above the jeans was right there at the bottom right corner, there's passive drip stains, and then you've got your little satellite spatters that basically bounce outward uniformly around the stain. That also tells me that the blood source was directly above that area of the pants because the blood bounced out uniformly around it. It didn't exaggerate down to one side or another side. So at this, with these stains, that's what I'm doing is I'm taking each stain and I'm looking at it individually, then I'm looking at it in relationship to the other stains around it. And that's what is providing me the opportunity to get a little bit more specific with positioning or location of the blood source in relationship to when these stains were deposited.
All right. And so you talked about a couple of things there. You talked about the satellite. Is that like we see here where there's like these little fringes coming off and the dots expanding out from it?
Yes.
And then you talk about directionality. I'm going to turn the jeans for a second. Is that like these here that are starting at the seam and go kind of downward?
Those, I called them smaller blood stains, but I cannot exclude that those are also satellite spatter from the large deposition of the large saturation stain. The directionality I'm talking about is the drip stains that are actually on the interior seam area of the pants. So that would be consistent with the blood being above those pants and going downward, as opposed to, for example, somebody, Miss Baker, standing up and the blood dripping down. It's not going to defy gravity and turn a corner to go down inside the seam of her leg. It's going to go down the front of her leg. So it's all of those factors that I'm taking into consideration.
So let me ask you a hypothetical. If Miss Baker was seated with her butt on the ground and her legs stretched out in front of her, so she's sort of like an L, you know, body up and then legs out, let's say, the blood could come out of her neck and fall onto her thigh. Would it then go in towards her inseam of her pants?
If she's leaned over, and that would also could possibly explain the lack of blood that is on the top portion of her pants, is if, because her injury, she had her face and her neck. If she's leaned over, that would then have deposited it away from her waistline and more towards her legs.
All right. So in that scenario where she's seated and bent like an L on the ground with her butt on the ground, she has to be leaning forward enough that the blood is basically falling directly onto her thigh and not, for example, on her chest or under her waist.
Correct.
Okay. And we'll talk about the backside of the pants in a second. But as a different scenario, would this also be consistent with the notion of Kay Baker is instead, I'm not limber, so I'm not going to try it. Kay Baker is basically sitting on the back of her heels, that her legs are bent underneath her and she's sitting on the back of her heels. And again, she's leaned forward a bit. The blood would fall onto her thigh and go towards her inseam area.
I cannot exclude that either.
So we know that at marker R, you've told us that she's got to be somewhere low on the ground, either potentially on her back or just barely off the ground, maybe up on her hands and knees or even laying on her stomach. But then these indications indicate to you that at some point Miss Baker is now sort of up where her neck is above her thighs.
Yeah, the blood source that's depositing these stains and patterns is above the thigh area and being allowed to drip downward.
All right, so I said we'd talk about it, so let's talk about it now. Here is State's Exhibit E. I know that you're a blood pattern expert, but do you see any dirt or mud or anything on her back of her jeans that would suggest she was seated with her butt on the ground?
There was no debris that was consistent with the area that I saw around her person.
All right, you got to see these jeans in person, so I just want to ask you, did you see any area of the jeans that looked something like depicted here in States 48E, these dirty feet?
I did see what I consider to be Florida sugar sand and debris on her knees.
On her knees, but as far as the backside of her?
No.
Again, with the sand on her knees and the blood the way it is deposited on the jeans on that thigh area, is that again potentially consistent with that notion that I put forward of she's sort of on her knees, seated on the back of her heels, and she's leaning forward a little bit as she's starting to bleed onto her thigh?
That is consistent.
I want to talk about Miss Baker's shirt. You had a chance to look at that too, correct?
I did.
Here is States 65F, and I don't know what it is because I'm not a fashion expert, but this is like a tank top or a camisole or something.
Yes.
Okay, so it's obviously it was cut originally. We know that from the medical records. It was cut by the first responders. Did you attempt to try and put it back to look like it roughly should?
I put it what would be consistent with its natural state prior to being cut, but I obviously have to be aware that it was.
All right, and this glaring light doesn't do me any favors, so let me see. Oh, that makes it worse. Let me see if I can get this to cooperate. It's a little hard to see there, but did you observe stains to the front of this shirt?
I did.
And what can you tell us about the stains to the front of the shirt, just as it is right now, without doing any sort of special lighting or camera filters or anything?
I was immediately drawn to the fact that there's still sugar sand on the front right side of the shirt. So even though these pieces and my analysis is being done segmented, these are all pieces that are eventually coming together that I put together to formulate my interpretation, my analysis. So that was one of the things that I also had put on the back burner, saying, okay, consistent with her being on her right side at some point. So I looked at this shirt and I saw what appeared to be saturation to the right side of the shirt. And I saw some other areas of possible saturation to the shirt, but it's not easily seen because of the dark color of the shirt.
So is there something you can do to help make the light more conducive or the circumstances more conducive to seeing the stains on the shirt?
Yes.
What can you do?
There is actually an excellent non-invasive piece of technology that I use. It's something called infrared documentation. And if the fabrics are very dark or very patterned, the infrared photography can be utilized to drop the dark background of the item if the composition of the material allows. What happens is the dark or patterned color actually drops. It can become like almost like a gray or almost like a light purplish color, and the blood stains will become more defined. And then we are able to do an analysis just like I was able to visually off of the jeans. So it makes the contrast a lot easier, and I'm able to then analyze and define the bloodstains and patterns.
All right, and so looking here, it states 65G. Is that what we're looking at?
Yes, that is actually an infrared photograph that I took during my evidence review. And I do it in segments, and I put my identifier front, left, front, right, back, front, or back, left, back, right, to help orient the photographs and the locations of bloodstains and patterns on the shirt.
So as we're looking at it right now, are we looking at the front left of the shirt?
Yes,
Basically here-ish.
correct.
Okay. So what do you notice about the front left of the shirt as depicted in states 65G? And if it helps you, we can also look at 65H, which is the continuation of the shirt. You just tell me what it is you want to look at, and I'll put it up here.
So what I was really interested in is the fact that there was heavy saturation to the right side of the shirt, but not to the left side of the shirt. Yet a lot of her very extensive injuries were to the left side of her neck. So these are things that I'm going through in my mind, and I'm looking at, and I'm attempting to analyze, and I'm hoping that the evidence is allowing me to interpret when and how the bloodstains and patterns were distributed. The other thing I didn't notice was not only is there not a lot of heavy concentration of saturation, there's not a lot of drip stains either, which is just another indication that if Miss Baker was the one that deposited the stains on her pants, that she would have been leaned over. So these are all information that is starting. I equate it to a traffic cone. Like you have the base of the traffic cone, it's very wide. And then as you go up the traffic cone, it gets very narrow. So what I'm trying to do is get up to the top of my traffic cone so that I can be a little bit more precise with my findings.
All right, so here in states 65H, we're looking at still the left side, but a little bit further down. Again, you see any sort of drip stains or major deposits other than this discolored area here by where it says front?
Yeah, that's a small saturation stain, but that saturation stain is disconnected from the neckline of the shirt, and I don't see the saturation to the bottom left side either.
So you saw the majority of the discoloration or stains on the shirt to the right side of the shirt.
Correct.
Again, is this consistent with the notion of the person is to the right on the ground, the wound is on the left side, but it's gravity is taking it to the right?
Correct.
Do you also have a chance to look at the back side of the shirt?
Yes.
Here states 65I. This is still that same shirt. We're just now looking at the back, right?
Correct.
And again, it's hard to see. So did you attempt to use that same lighting trick to see what you could see?
I did.
So here is state 65J and also 65K. This is the back left side of the shirt, correct?
Yes.
Did you make note of the fact that Miss Baker had an injury to the back of her neck, a sort of crooked wound to the back of her neck?
I did.
And so tell us how that and whatever it is you see on the shirt plays together.
When I did the evidence review and took these photographs and subsequently went back and looked at them in more detail in my office, I realized that those are consistent in appearance with passive drip stains. And so I identified them at the evidence review, which is why I put a scale in there to show relative size. So what I thought was interesting is there's passive drip stains on the back left side of the shirt, but not on the front. So at some point, a blood source is in very close proximity to the back of Miss Baker, and blood is dripping down her shirt. These are not consistent with being deposited while she's on her right side, because they're, as you can see, the back left is actually along the seam line of the shirt, and they're not going sideways. They're going downward. So those are all things that I was attempting to capture with my infrared photography.
And again, you don't know exactly what wound is bleeding onto the back of Miss Baker's shirt, but from the evidence, did you only notate one wound to the actual back of her neck.
Correct. And that was per the medical examiner's report.
And
Yes.
so if that's the wound that is bleeding on her back side that would then potentially drip onto the back of her shirt, would that wound have to have been higher in space than the shirt where it can therefore drip down onto the shirt?
Yes.
So if she was standing upright as I am now, that would be an option, correct?
I could not exclude that. Correct.
If she was seated on the ground with her butt on the ground and her legs out in front of her, that would be an option, correct?
Yes. The injury would have to be above her neckline.
Or if she was down on her knees, seated on the back of her heels, and at some point her head is pulled up enough that the wound is now able to get backwards instead of, leaning forward with gravity. Is that also a possibility?
Yes.
So that's the left side of the shirt. Let's talk about the right side of the shirt. Here is states 65L and 65M. And if you need me to change back and forth between pictures, please tell me. But tell us what you notice about this.
The back right shirt up near the top, near the neckline area and around the armpit area was saturated with blood. And you can see the heavy saturation. And then there are additional drip stains that are on the bottom right side of the shirt. And some of them exhibited directionality downward.
So again, there must have been some sort of source of blood that was spilling blood that was higher up on Miss Baker's backside and is going down her shirt.
Yes.
Okay. So in an entirely hypothetical universe, if you had like a 7-foot tall basketball player, he could be standing behind Miss Baker bleeding from the front down the back of her shirt, right?
I could not exclude that.
So it's possible that this could be somebody else bleeding onto Miss Baker's shirt. Is that correct?
As long as whatever blood is dripping down the back is above her neckline.
Okay. But given the directionality of the blood going down the back and not sort of across the back towards the ground, would this rule out the possibility that somebody was, for example, over Miss Baker with a bleeding wound trying to render her aid, and their blood is spilling onto her shirt if she's laying on her side?
The blood staining, the passive drip stains in the back are not consistent. With the ones with directionality are not consistent with that.
And given the fact that we know that Miss Baker is laying on her right side and her left side is up, I want to talk with you about states 65D. If I was to posit the theory that as Miss Baker is laying on the ground, her right side on the ground, her left side is up, and a person comes over and is bleeding from the neck and is trying to render aid to Miss Baker and the blood is spilling out of their neck, is that consistent with the genes?
I didn't see heavy saturation. There's no heavy saturation along the left seam area, which would be the side area. And there was no spilling, for lack of a better term, where that would be going down the leg. So that is not consistent, no.
Based on the directionality of the blood on the genes, then that would be inconsistent with the notion of somebody being over Miss Baker as she's laying on her side and they're just bleeding onto her, correct?
That the blood on the left side of her, this outer seam area, that is not consistent now.
All right, so now I want to jump over to one second. I'm just putting these back in order. Do you see where I put the long map? There it is. It's hiding behind the screen. Now I want to draw your attention to this area over here. What is markers G, H, so on, all the way to where it says RAD 1 through 3. Did you look at these photos?
I did.
Okay. So we know that we had A, B, C, D, E going through the bushes, and then we had this one F here alone. There were no evidence markers between F and G, correct?
Correct.
And do you know why?
I read in the reports that they had initiated a canine search.
All right. So since they used a canine and there's no markers, does that mean that we can be absolutely certain that there isn't blood between F and G?
No.
There could, in fact, be more blood between F and G. They just didn't take the time to look for it because they used the dog.
Correct.
All right, so let's look at the pictures of F and G and H. All right, so here's an overview. This is States Exhibit 66N, as in Nancy. There is a variety of blood, and again, this is laid out in a particular order, G, H, I, moving through the alphabet. But do you have any way of knowing which one of these came first or second or third?
No.
Let's look at these for a second. The first one that pops up is G, and let me find a close-up of that. Here's states G, and that's an O. That's in 66O, and here's 66P. What are we seeing here?
There's transfer on that leaf, and then down towards the tip of the leaf, there's a little bit of blood that is pulled together.
Okay. This is blood basically contained on the size of a leaf, correct?
Yes.
This is not like feet and feet of blood.
Correct.
So now I want to draw your attention to States Exhibit H. I'm going to work backwards for a second. Here's States Exhibit H. And this is in 66T. What are we seeing here?
In this particular area, that is a relatively large saturation stain to the leaves and the ground in that area, and radiating outward around that saturation stain are multiple satellite spatter stains.
All right, and I want to ask you to look at the H here is to the right of the stain of blood, correct?
Yes.
So when we look at state 66S, over here, sort of northwestish of the H instead of directly west of the H, is that where we see 66U, which I don't know what the best way to try and see this is, but for example, here on this leaf right there, does that appear consistent with blood?
Yes, there's multiple satellite spatter stains on all those leaves.
All right. So you've seen the drops of blood that went through the yard, like at J and like at A. We've seen the pictures before of F, and we saw the picture at E. Is this something different than those other ones by size?
By size, overall appearance, and also there's coarse drip trails.
And so since you have a larger size, since you have a difference of appearance, and since you have drip trails, what, if anything, can you tell us about, for example, the stains that are around the area of marker H?
The satellite, or excuse me, the saturation to the area, it was a large area of saturation, but it was fairly confined. And the fact that there were so many satellite spatters around it, and it was uniformly around the saturation stain, and satellite actually went out pretty far in relationship to the original parent saturation stain. That in appearance and distribution and the stains relationship to each other, as well as the very dense drip trails, is most consistent with an actively bleeding injury and a rapid distribution of blood.
All right. And so this is a wound that's bleeding quickly and bleeding a lot effectively.
Yes, and it's uninhibited, and that's one of the things that I'm also have to take in consideration is where injuries are on the person and what clothing, if any, the individual who possibly distributed the stains was wearing.
All right. And so if we were to go back to the diagram, states 65A. is this whole area here relatively small drops or small stains of blood in comparison to the one that we saw depicted in the photos at H?
Yes.
So H is suddenly something different. Is that correct?
Yes.
I next want to talk to you about what's depicted here in state 66CC, which then moves into state 66DD, and here towards state 66EE. What can you tell us about these various stains? Are they connected? Are they different in size or shape? Anything unusual about them?
The stains at J and K drips trails. So I was able to, based on their relationship to each other, their relative size and relationship to each other, their proximity to each other, I felt comfortable identifying that as a drip trail. And those drip trails are in close proximity to the large, another large area of saturation, which also has some satellite spatters around it, but nothing to the extent that we saw in the other saturation pattern.
Okay, but again, there's satellite spatter. Is this indicating a wound that is bleeding fairly quickly or a large amount?
Yes, it's not consistent with the source of blood remaining stationary, for example, laying on the ground.
So not a person laying on the ground yet.
No, the source is slightly elevated from the ground, allowing the blood to come down and then make contact and bounce, both because of the possible rapid distribution as well as the texture and the foliage that it's dripping onto. Is not consistent with an individual who's just laying there bleeding.
All right, and so I next want to show you states 66GG, just to orient us. There's this blue cooler in the picture. And then is this fence line the backyard or the edge of a yard of one of the homes along Kite Ridge?
Yes.
And then there's a series of red evidence markers moving there on the left-hand side of the photo. Are those the same evidence markers that are depicted here in states 66II?
Yes.
And so, for example, there's M, N, and an O there.
Yes.
Are those areas large pools of blood like we saw in H? Or are they, again, like a trail or small droplets like we saw in many of the other pictures moving through the backyard of like 6209 and 6207?
The area at M was a transfer stain to a leaf. And then N and O were saturation stains and combination of transfer stains in the to the ground, which is more consistent with a bleeding source being stationary in that time, possibly laying or in very, very close proximity with the injury to the ground.
All right. So there's an indication that a person might have been laying on the ground there for some period of time or been very close to the ground. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, and then I want to show you States Exhibit 6600. I'm not going to go through each of these photos, but there are these three green triangles on this fence. Did you look at these?
I did.
And I'm just going to show you, for example, 66PP. What did you notice about these particular stains on the fence?
I identified the stains as swipe and transfer stains, which indicates a source of blood was contaminated or an item was contaminated with wet blood and came into contact. And at some point, one or multiple of the contacts indicated relative movement. And then I also notated that some of the stains had sufficient blood volume that flow patterns had begun to basically flow down the side of the fence that was facing Lithia Pinecrest Road.
All right, and you describe it as transfer, and I don't want to use the word touch to necessarily mean a hand, but something obviously came into contact, touched against the fence. Is that correct?
Correct.
And based on the way that the blood is on the fence, does it look like whatever touched the fence, the blood then, for lack of a better term, dripped down the fence?
Correct.
So it looks like something with a decent amount of blood came into contact with the fence enough that it could then drip down the fence.
Yes.
Now, I want to talk with you about the injuries to the defendant's neck. Did you have a chance to look at those photos?
I did.
And for example, here in states 27A and then closer up, states 27B, and then looking at the other side, 27C. Based on what you see in these wounds, would you expect these wounds to bleed when they were caused?
Yes.
Okay. And so if I was to offer you the notion that a person ran through the backyards of 6209 and 6207, crossed through the bushes, and then ran along Lithia Pinecrest, eventually coming to the area of H, and decided to then open their neck. Is there anything consistent about the blood pool at H that says that couldn't be the situation?
As you've presented it, I can't exclude that.
But I mean, would these wounds potentially bleed enough that they could cause the kind of rapid blood flow that you talked about at H that could then create that pool of blood at H and the resulting satellite spatter?
Yes, I can't exclude those because I did read the ER notes. Yes.
All right. And so I understand you can't say with any certainty that that's exactly what happened, but the evidence does not contravene that. Is that correct?
Correct. I can't exclude it.
If I could have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Pass the witness, Your Honor. Thank you.
Let me have the attorney report. Is there anyone, just by a show of hands, that can't go for about another 30 minutes tonight? You have some place you gotta be, kids to pick up or anything like that? All right, let the record reflect there are no hands. Thank you, and thank you for your patience. We're gonna turn to the cross-examination.
The judge couldn't see me raising my hand. Darn.
Yes, you need to ask.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Fox. Hello. I'm going to give you this. I like color, so I'm just going to make sure that I marked that correctly before I show that to the jury. Are there any spots I've marked? If I can just see the color. Oh, no, it's okay. I've marked in yellow, Kay Baker's DNA. I've marked in orange, Matthew Terry and Kate Baker's DNA where they come together. In blue, Matthew Terry's DNA. And then we'll get to the pink in just a moment. Are there any spots of Kay Baker's DNA, Matthew Terry's DNA, or any time where they intersect that is not marked on this chart?
No.
Great. So we've got here in the yellow, Kay Baker's DNA, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And we have a little diagram here that shows where she came to final rest just beside that spot where her DNA was found, right?
Correct.
We've got a spot that's marked as BB, just a little bit more towards the backyard that is both Kay Baker and Matthew Terry's DNA together, right?
Correct.
You can't exclude that if Matthew Terry went over to help Kay Baker where she came to final rest and got her blood on his hands, and then he was attacked and ended up stumbling into that wall, hitting it with his hand that had gotten Kay's blood on it, that spot BB could have been caused by him simply touching that wall after he got her blood on his hands after he was attacked, correct?
The item that distributed that cast off would have had to been a mixture of both prior to deposition.
Sure. So if Matthew was already injured and he had touched Kay when she had blood on her, trying to help her when she was injured, that's a way that that blood could get together and then be cast off where BB is, correct?
Yeah, I can't exclude that.
Sure. And also where you is down the fence line, we can't exclude that if he further was stumbling from being so attacked, that the exact same thing could have happened down at you, correct?
Would have had to have been premixed prior to being deposited. Yes, ma'am.
Sure, but could have still happened in the same way as long as he had been trying to help her and got her blood on his hands, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then we also have over here this J, which is Matthew Terry's blood, as well as A right here, that's Matthew Terry's blood. You can't exclude that after he was attacked, he was trying to chase the assailant, and that's how those spots got there, right?
No, I can't opine to intent.
And can't exclude, in fact, that that's exactly how those spots could have gotten there. That's a possibility, right?
I don't know intent. I can't exclude that. Correct.
Okay, great. And now I said we'd get to the pink in just a moment. The pink I've marked as unknown. That is all the blood and all the areas that were not tested, correct?
Correct. There was the ones that do not have DNA results listed were not tested.
So we're talking about DD, correct?
Objection, DD was tested.
Is that correct? Because I asked you if I had marked them all. Did I miss one?
Do you need to approach or?
I can, if that's helpful to her. Do you need to see it again?
I'd have to refer to the DNA report that I received. I can't recall
Do you have that there?
the DNA report. I
Yes.
do have it with me.
Go ahead and take a look. You take your time. And I'll bring you up the chart so you can mark any that have been missed.
I'm referring directly to the FDLA report. I have submission 1. Right hand of Matthew Terry was
I'm
tested.
gonna have you just take a look and you just go ahead and look at the chart and you let me know if there's any spots that need to be marked and then we'll show the jury again.
I am not seeing in my reports that I have that DD.
So as far as you're aware, all the spots have been marked already.
That I'm familiar with, yes.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and do that then. And again, so that means as far as the information that you have, every other spot that isn't already in yellow, blue, or orange is an unknown, correct?
As far as DNA testing goes, yes, ma'am.
Great. So we're talking about S. Is that correct?
That was not tested, correct.
Looks like there's a, I believe that's a Q, but my eyes are getting old. It could be an O is right here.
Correct.
CC as well?
CC was tested, did not come back as the indicative presumptive of phenolphthalein, so it was not tested, but it was submitted.
Okay, how about AA?
It was not DNA tested.
Z, Y, X, W, and V.
No.
M, N, and O.
Correct. No DNA testing.
K and L.
Correct.
H and I.
Correct.
G and F.
Yes, ma'am.
E and D.
Correct.
A, B, C.
Correct.
Now we've got that spot we talked about a moment ago. That's the other A. That's Matthew Terry. But then there's a B, C, D, and E. None of those were tested, right?
Correct.
F, not tested.
Not that I'm aware of.
And then I know you indicated there weren't markers, but that was because a dog was used. It's possible there was additional blood between F and G, none of which was tested, right?
It's possible. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we'll put a question mark up here. And then over way on the other side, we've got more G, H, I, O, none of which was tested, correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
And then this is that wrought iron fence that you were talking about where there were some marks on the fence itself, right?
Yes.
And those weren't tested either, right?
Correct.
Everything pink is unknown, right?
It was not DNA tested. Correct.
And we can't exclude that some of that DNA was a third or fourth person, right?
There was no other mixtures with the stains that were tested. So I'm going by the information that I have been provided with the blood that was tested and was also confirmed to be from the 2 bleeding individuals that were confirmed as part of the incident.
Can't exclude that there was a third or fourth person, right?
Correct.
And in fact, if the DNA person, Ms. Troutman, testified that she's the one who put 2 people into STR mix and didn't bother to put in the possibility of 3, that wouldn't be something you'd have any information about, right?
Correct. I'm not familiar with her testing procedures.
Now, of course, there's no blood inside the home or garage that you've been given any information about, right?
That is incorrect. There was blood inside the master bedroom.
I'm sorry, that was transferred by a deputy. You know that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so other than that, which a new deputy made a mistake and accidentally got in the house, there was no blood inside the home or the garage, correct?
Correct.
And so you don't have any opinion about what occurred inside the home or the garage, correct?
I do not.
And other than the stains where Ms. Baker came to final rest and the obvious that something happened where she and Matthew Terry were injured, there's nothing about the blood stains that give any indication of the sequencing of events, right?
I feel it's the evidence, the blood evidence that I spoke about earlier from being identified at photo marker R, that's where the stain was deposited by her carotid artery, and then her final resting place is at area T.
Sure, but other than that's where she came to final rest, there's nothing about the blood stains that tell you anything about the sequence of what happened, right?
What, like when injuries were inflicted specifically, time frame? No.
Or which ones were inflicted first, other than the final one.
Correct.
Okay. And you talked a lot about the blood on Miss Baker's jeans. There's no DNA testing telling us whose blood that is, right?
There was no DNA, no.
So it could have been Miss Baker's blood. It could have been the assailant's blood. We don't know, right?
It was not DNA tested.
And that includes her shirt as well.
Correct.
And the blood stains on Ms. Baker's lower legs could actually have been caused by her swinging her arms or hands if she had blood on them as she was trying to escape, right?
There are some stains that I did identify as cast off, but those weren't the ones that I discussed previously.
Sure, but those stains could have in fact been caused by Ms. Baker herself trying to get away, right?
Which ones?
Some of the ones on her jeans that you indicated were actually possible to have been caused by her swinging her hands trying to escape.
The stains that I identified as cast off were not addressed with Mr. Diaz he and I during his direct of mine.
Sure.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear that the stains that he and I discussed were not cast off from the swinging of any weapon or any type of hands or bloody instrument. Were cast off stains, but they're a different area on her jeans. I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Okay. So there were cast off blood stains that could have been caused by Ms. Baker herself just simply trying to get away.
I cannot exclude those for the cast off stains, correct?
Okay. And additionally, the blood stain on the front porch that was near Ms. Baker's head, that could have been caused when she was rolled over by the 911 caller, right?
Correct. It's with her possible movement as well as her being rolled over, both activities that could cause the cast off.
And in fact, you indicated that you heard the 911 call. Do you know that Mr. Figgins, the 911, him and his wife really both were the 911 callers, actually got Kay's blood on him trying to help her?
My understanding is that he did perform CPR, so I don't find that to be surprising.
And Matthew Terry could also have gotten Kay's blood on him trying to help her similarly, correct?
I can't exclude that.
Now, you indicated that U and B are mixtures of Kay and Matt's blood. So again, that mixture just simply means that at some point he had gotten Kay's blood on him prior to him injured also getting his blood where those spots were, as we talked about a few minutes ago, right?
Yes, both had actively bleeding injuries and was mixed prior to deposition. Correct.
And in regard to actively bleeding injuries, you also mentioned that at H, there was a large concentration of blood, right?
Red H?
H is right here.
No.
Okay, where's the H you were referring to then?
The red H down by the telephone utility pole?
This one?
Correct.
Okay. So down here, this H, there's a large concentration of blood, right?
Correct, a large saturation pattern.
So an additional very serious injury may have occurred at H.
I cannot exclude that.
And there's nothing about the blood stains that tell you anything about where Matthew Terry was when he incurred the 2 wounds to his neck, right?
Correct.
So it's entirely possible that at that H he was attacked and was actually injured there, causing that larger blood stain, correct?
That blood stain was caused by a rapidly bleeding injury. I don't know when that would have occurred.
And he certainly, because you've seen the photographs, had multiple injuries, including an injury that caused blood on his face and in his nose. Did you see those photos?
I did note that he had blood in his nostrils. I didn't see an injury to his nostrils, but I did see blood in his nostrils.
And Matthew Terry's clothing in person was actually covered in blood. You can't exclude that that blood could have been his own, correct?
Correct. His shirt was saturated up by the collar line.
Now, you've been to the scene. I know you talked about that a little bit with Mr. Diaz. If you're in the backyard looking past the bushes and the overgrown foliage and trees, you can actually see the large roadway that it's called Lithia Pinecrest. You can see that roadway, right?
Correct.
So that foliage isn't so thick that you can't see the road. It doesn't completely obscure it. You can just simply see it through the trees and the brush there.
It's visible, yes, ma'am.
And someone could easily come from that roadway on foot through the foliage into the backyard, right?
I can't testify as somebody else could easily. I walked that area and I had no intention of going through. It was very thick.
Did you previously say that someone could have come from the roadway on foot through the foliage in the backyard?
Yes, I did say that, and somebody did who was bleeding.
Sure, and somebody actually did. You can see that somebody was able to go through there.
Yes, ma'am.
There's also a large walking trail right adjacent to those residences, right?
Objection outside the scope.
I can recall her if they'd prefer.
I'm going to overrule all that.
There's a large walking trail by the residences, correct?
Not, okay, are you talking about the sidewalks out front or the actual walking trail?
The walking, actually, that's a good point. There's sidewalks out front that go to a cul-de-sac, right?
Correct.
And then behind that, couple of residences away, there's a walking trail as well that go out towards the same cul-de-sac, but at and end up around a big lake, right?
The walking trail actually goes out and as down by the house that's at the end of the row, the walking trail actually veers to the right. It doesn't go down along that tree line and foliage line. There is no walking trail there. It's actually an embankment. And the only reason I know that is because I walked it.
And you can, in fact, as you did, walk it to get to that walking trail, right?
Very carefully, yes, you can.
Sure. And that walking trail then goes past that lake, and then there's a big open field as well, right?
There, the walking trail goes down. The lake is, so for example, if this is the sidewalk, like where I have the words not to scale, that would be the sidewalk. The cul-de-sac is going to be down towards the right bottom area of the scale. And then the lake, as I recall, is back there, like all over in the corner.
Sure.
And then it's big enough that the walking trail goes down with the pine crest, but it's not in proximity to those 607, 609, or 6211.
The walking trail is right about here, right about 6223, right?
I recall it as the cul-de-sac that it veers to the right down at the end of those houses.
Sure.
Yes,
It
ma'am.
kind of veers around into a circle to come back, right?
I didn't walk the walking trail, so I just walked the embankment.
And the embankment, as you indicated, goes past, and then there's still the furthering and the additional roadway of Lithia Pinecrest. So we've got just a walking trail, a large roadway, a lake, and an open field, all within walking distance of where this occurred, right?
You can walk to those from the residences, yes, ma'am.
Now, you have no opinion on who could have caused any of these injuries, correct?
No, ma'am.
And you have no opinion in regard to whether it was some third or fourth assailant, correct?
I have no opinion on that.
Could I just have a moment?
Yes.
Nothing further.
You're right.
I suppose it's common sense, but I'll ask. Every place that Ms. Perry pointed out that it was unknown, that could be the defendant's blood, correct?
Cannot be excluded, correct?
Thank you. That's it, Your Honor.
Maybe we just be released.
Yes, Your Honor.
And by the defendant.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. You may step down. You may be released as a witness at this time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to call it a day. Thank you for allowing us to go a little bit late. You'd be due for a break now anyway, and then after a break, it'd be late, so we're not going to go any later tonight. I do want you tomorrow, though, to be prepared just in case. I'm not saying that we will, but just in case we're in a similar situation where we need to go a little bit later tomorrow night. So just be prepared for that. I will again instruct you not to do any research related to this case, not to talk about this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else, and to please avoid any reports of this case outside of the courtroom in any way, shape, or form, media, social media, or anything else. So with that said, I am going to release you for the evening. It's 5:30, so it's probably still light outside, but it'll be dark soon. So please be careful. Have a safe trip home and a safe trip back, and I look forward to seeing you in the morning. All rise for the jury. Jury has exited. Everyone may be seated. Well, that was a little longer than a half hour, Mr. Diaz, from the break.
I said at least a half an hour.
Oh, okay. Perhaps you did. What tomorrow, obviously, we'll start off with a witness. Do you expect to rest?
I would hope to rest before lunch, yeah, before lunch hour.
Okay.
Well, before the lunch hour, I would hope. But that's
All right. Well, obviously, we'll have some motions, and then we'll see where we're at tomorrow. Never know. I suppose there's a possibility. Be prepared just in case. You know more than us, and I don't expect you to tell us. But I suppose there's a possibility we could do closings tomorrow. But just be prepared in case. All right. Is there anything from either side?
Do you have a copy of Ms. Cox's PowerPoint just marked as a court exhibit in case?
I agree,
I
absolutely.
don't have it available. I'll have to tell her on the disc
Can you
and
bring
then-
one?
Yeah, I'll just have to print out
A disc or a printout? What do you think?
I can print it out. That's fine. I'll print it out.
I think a printout's probably better.
Yes, sir.
So,
Will it be okay that it's in black and white?
is that,
Should be the way it was presented to the jury.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm gonna have to,
Oh.
have it first thing in the morning because my AV department's
Okay.
closed. That's
so,
all.
all right, just at some point, don't let us forget that we do want to put a court exhibit in that represents the PowerPoint that was used. What are, yes. So I don't know. I think we've already had one court exhibit, so I don't know what number we're at. This is number 2.
It would be 2 and 3.
Okay.
We had one already.
Okay, so this will be 2, and then Mr. Diaz's PowerPoint will be 3. Mr. Diaz, Mr. Kane is giving the clerk the bench notes that he used during his cross-examination, and we're making that court exhibit 2.
I have no objection to being court.
Okay, court exhibit 2 will be the bench notes used during cross-examination. Court exhibit 3 will be the PowerPoint presentation used with this last witness. Anything else from the defense? Have a very nice evening. I will see everyone here bright and early, 9 a.m.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it would help if I did sound. So I am positive he's going to put on the ex-girlfriend in the morning, and then the prosecution will rest their case. So either I can cover that or I can cover the Daryl Brooks. It's up to you guys. Do you want to come back tomorrow and hear this woman finally, or do you want to hear Daryl Brooks? I can actually get the highlights from Daryl Brooks and bring them to you on the show for Wednesday. If you want Brooks, or you guys want Brooks, okay? We'll do Daryl Brooks tomorrow. So what I'll do is this woman that testifies tomorrow will get the highlights from her testimony. Everybody's saying Brooks. All right, we'll do Brooks tomorrow. Yeah, I'll get her highlighted testimony for my show on Wednesday. And so you won't miss that either. It won't be her entire testimony, but it'll be the highlights. So yeah, tomorrow we'll cover Daryl Brooks. So I will see you then. Just bring your box of tissues, because when those people start testifying, it's going to be really sad. But they wanted to get their victim impact statements over and done with so they could all leave town before Thanksgiving occurred again, and they had another Christmas parade. They didn't want to be in town for the next Christmas parade, so that's why they're doing it tomorrow. Oh, you haven't followed Darrell Brooks, Marty? You're in for some entertainment. All right, I will see you guys in the morning then. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye.